уперлася москальня, казавши на парад Київ іде, любим сусідам руський мір принесе. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Десь у полях, танки ворожі шукав собі шлях, а фермери українські ті танки знайшли і собі на тракторі додому потягли. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна засіває в землю руські добрива. Каже Пісков, що потерь у нас нет, з неба летить вам Байрактара привет. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна стала до бою і міцна, як стіна. Б'є ЗСУ, артилерія б'є, жоден москаль у наш дім не зайде. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир.
Ми Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у щах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Хто води всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там вбивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить, хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ, тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello, everyone. I am the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome back to day 137 of the news and another night of fundraising for Ukraine.
And of course, it is the Sunday fundraiser night, and we have huge news both on the stream, as from what I'm seeing on the second monitor, and from Ukraine. We're of course going to be covering that here in a second, but I want to go over what has just happened on stream. Tonight, the support for this fundraiser has been incredible. Before we could even start the stream, I said, can we get to 1K before the stream starts? We immediately hit $1,000 in support for Doctors Without Borders within about 6 minutes of the stream actually being live. I said, can we hit 1.5 thousand? And we've now hit $1.6 thousand. We're almost already 40% of the way to having this fundraiser knocked out. And I have to say that, of course, Doctors Without Borders is one of the best fundraisers, best nonprofits that we've ever fundraised for, and I highly recommend that everyone does help to support Doctors Without Borders. We've done these fundraisers every single Sunday since we were able to on this channel, since the war started, and I actually have some figures to share with y'all before we get into tonight's schedule. So this is actually our 18th Sunday fundraiser. We have run these continuously every single week for 18 weeks in a row. And over the course of these 18 weeks, well, really 17 because we haven't gotten the figures out for tonight, but over the past 17 weeks, the Lee Spring Army, in its entirety, from top to bottom, every single one of y'all has helped to contribute to this figure. And I have to tell y'all, I'm incredibly proud that we were able to get this far, and we're going to get even farther tonight. We have managed to raise $343,987.47 for nonprofits that have been operating in Ukraine since the start of the war. That is close to $350,000, and we might be able to hit that mark tonight. Of course, the $5,000 goal, and if we're just able to reach that, is going to get us around $348,000. But if we're able to go just a little over, just $2,000 over our goal tonight, we'll be able to hit $350,000 even, which is going to be a massive amount of support that we've, of course, levied for Ukraine, and a testament to the community here on this channel and the Lee Spring Army. But without further ado, I'm not going to hold us back talking about that too much. We'll, of course, probably be talking about that a lot on the stream tonight because it is the Sunday night fundraiser. But let's get to the news. And of course, the news is massive tonight. We've gotten an official report that President Zelenskyy has given the order for an attack in the Kherson region, which we'll actually be covering first thing tonight. We'll be covering the Kherson area with its 2 bits of news as the primary thing of tonight's stream, and so it will be first in the schedule tonight. After we cover the Kherson area, we're then going to be moving north to the Chernihiv area, where you've actually gotten a really, really old piece of film that no one had seen until today. It was finally put out today onto the internet, and so while it's incredibly old footage, it is very new in terms of its upload date, and so it was included today because it gives us a better perspective of what was actually happening in the outskirts of Chernihiv way back in the first few weeks of the war. Moving on from Chernihiv, we'll then be covering all of our location unknowns, which we have 7 of tonight. And after we cover the location unknowns, we're then going to be moving into the Russian area up here in Moscow. We're going to start covering the Moscow news. But of course, before we get there, we're of course going to answer 3 questions from the chat and also see how far this fundraiser has gone. After we do that, we'll then be moving out of the Russian news. Well, actually, we'll be moving into the Russian news, covering that, and then we'll be going down into the Kharkiv and northern Donbas area and covering all of the news there. After we cover all the Kharkiv, Russia, and northern Donbas news, we'll then be moving into the southern Donbas, as well as the remainder of the southern front and the Dnieper news, along with the 1 bit of news that we got in Crimea. And of course, before we get to all of that, we're going to answer another 3 questions from the chat and also see how far the fundraiser has gotten at that point. And in both instances, we will be recognizing some of our largest donors to the fundraisers at this very night. And after we do that, we'll then move on to the remainder of the news in the southern front. We'll also be covering this 1 bit of news, which is huge. We will be covering that almost as the last thing on the stream tonight, and it's massive news, but of course we'll cover that. And then finally, we'll return back to Ukraine to cover the speech from President Zelenskyy, and after that speech ends, the news segment of the stream will have ended, and we'll try and answer as many questions as possible. Hopefully this stream does not crash on us. If it does, I'm going to be kind of disappointed, but of course, we are in for some massive news tonight. And so without further ado, let's get right into it, starting off in the Kherson area. Zelenskyy has ordered an attack. It's been made public by the Ukrainian government and loads of Ukrainian officials. They are planning a massive counterattack in the Kherson region. The governor of the Mykolaiv Oblast days ago said to the citizens of Kherson, if they did get the message, to evacuate the city as soon as possible because the fight will be coming to their streets and they don't want any of the Ukrainians to get hurt in the process. Not only that, but today we got another report, which unfortunately I wasn't able to put this down on the map tonight. I didn't put a bulletin, thought I would just summarize it. The Ukrainian Minister of Defense has also stated that Ukrainian forces are being pulled from all around the country to this area to start one of the largest counterattacks that this war has ever seen. And the Ukrainians are putting a lot of publicity on this, a lot of news on it. And I'm assuming that this is definitely going to be a spectacle for the ages. It's going to be the largest counterattack anyone's ever seen in this entire war. And I'm looking forward to it because as far as we know, the Ukrainians, out of everywhere on the front, have been met with the most progress in the Kharkiv region, which that was a long time ago at this point, and most recently in the Kherson region. And so the Russians do appear to be somewhat weak in this area, and it appears that the Ukrainians are getting ready. And there will be blood, I guess you could say. Kind of like the movie Gangs of New York, if you've ever seen that. You know, what was his name? Daniel Day-Lewis. There's going to be blood in the streets. You know, however he said it. But anyways, the Ukrainians are definitely going to be pushing the Kherson area. And I can't wait to be able to cover that news. They've already telegraphed it in advance for me. And so we're already getting the popcorn out. We're getting ready to collect the news. And once it happens, it is going to be one of the most important things that's probably happened in this war so far. So with that, let's move into the video news we have gotten today from the area. Starting off on the eastern side of the city, we have seen a long-range Stugna attack near Kherson City. You see the Stugna firing. It's now traveling on its way. You can hardly see it. The footage is a little dark. It looks like it may be dawn or dusk over there in this video. You see the Russian tank right there on the road. Now we can see one of the tanks moving away. And then the tank is hit dead on. A dead-on hit, and of course, the excellence that the Ukrainian Stugna crews, are known for. These kinds of attacks with Stugnas are not incredibly difficult, but the range itself was impressive. It looked to be probably around 2.5 miles of range that missile had to cover before it hit the tank, and it's impressive to see that the Ukrainians are knocking out the Russians in every single regard. With that, we're now going to be moving to the western side of the city, where we've seen the 59th Brigade, which is in the area of Kherson, hitting Russian forces. And when I say they're hitting Russian forces, I forgot to mention the small part, that they wiped out an entire battalion tactical group in this tree line. That's a little bit of an exaggeration. I'm assuming they knocked out at least half of it, but in this video, you're about to watch 30 separate plumes of fire come billowing out of this tree line, which lets us know that each one of those is a vehicle, and the Ukrainians have practically wiped out a large Russian unit in one artillery strike. Within a matter of seconds, this entire unit was destroyed. Here's the video. We can see them highlighting the tree line that the Russian tanks are in. We're about to see the Ukrainians do not take kindly to Russians in the trees. The first shell has landed, and we can already see that it hit dead on, and there's a vehicle smoking inside the tree line. We can now see multiple tanks burning throughout the entire tree line, and multiple vehicles as well, and the artillery is still coming down. Iron explosions are coming from the vehicles, and chaos is most likely taken over the Russian ranks inside of these tree lines. They're most likely abandoning the vehicles, running for the surrounding tree lines or the fields to try and get away from this Ukrainian artillery barrage, which has completely wiped out this unit in the trees. Oh, man. This is probably the worst amount of Russian losses that we've ever seen in a single film. The entire tree line has been set alight by Russian tanks that are burning inside of it now. And the Ukrainians just are beginning. There's still about another 40 seconds left in this video of these Russian tanks burning and more artillery strikes landing on the tree line, destroying more equipment. I mean, talk about a wipeout. This is a whole entire Russian unit that will be stricken from the roster. Just in case y'all don't know what that means, there's actually a decent amount of rosters that are kept in the military because for some reason the military, and of course there's a reason why, but for some reason the military obsesses with spreadsheets, data, and information. And of course, data that they like to collect is the capability of their units. And I think that unit, regardless whether it was part of a BTG, a battalion, well, not a battalion, a company, a platoon, or whatnot, that has definitely been stricken from the roster because they don't even exist after that artillery barrage. It's a beautiful thing to see, and I am so glad that we got to watch that on film. These kinds of losses are what we can expect here in the future in the Kherson area once that counterattack comes underway, and if it does, we are going to have a lot of footage to cover showing how successful the Ukrainians are. They've already been successful with the smaller counterattack they made a few weeks ago, covering a large amount of ground all the way to Davydiv Brid, and hopefully in the future, we'll see Ukrainian forces raising the flag over the city square in Kherson, which is around, I believe, right here. So if we see that, that's going to be a fine day for Ukraine, and a terrible day for Russia as they'll be taking their first major defeat in terms of losing an occupied city. Just for those of y'all who do not know, Russia, whenever they've taken a city so far in this war, a major one like Kherson, Melitopol, Mariupol, Severodonetsk, or Lysychansk, so far they have not lost a single city that they have taken from a Ukrainian counterattack. It's actually a testament to the Ukrainian defense in the early parts of the war that they were never able to take a major city in the north like Chernihiv, Sumy, or Kyiv, or for that matter, Zhytomyr. And so it's really cool, actually, to think that so far the Russians failed in attacking these cities, weren't even able to take them for the Ukrainians to get the credit of retaking them. But it's going to be really interesting to see the Ukrainians finally retake a city that the Russians actually pushed them out of, and that city will be Kherson, which symbolically, in a way, was one of the first major cities, the first, actually, major city that the Russians took in this entire war. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Kherson area and that impressive news, and we're now going to be moving up to the Chernihiv area to some incredibly old footage, about from 4 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. So this is new old footage, but what you can see here is a Russian tank, a BMP-3, moving down a street in the outskirts of Chernihiv, and it gets smacked at close range by Ukrainian anti-tank fire. Here's the video. When you see the Russians here... Wait a minute. Hang on. Wait a minute, I think we might be able to piece this story together a little bit better if I can see what's going on back here. Oh my god. Alright, so now we figured out... Now let me explain. I'm sorry if I'm stuttering over my words. I'm actually really excited about everything that's going on tonight, so forgive me for that. But here's what's happening. Here is a Russian BMP. This right here is also a Russian BMP. That right there is a Ukrainian tank that apparently rounded the corner, or the BMPs rounded the corner, and then they found out that they had taken the wrong turn, and they were now on the same street, face to face, just yards from each other. You can see the tank firing right there, but one important thing I would like to note is that this crew took no chances and immediately was climbing out of that BMP to try and get the hell out of there because they knew that whatever was about to happen was not going to be good for that BMP. And the Ukrainians blasted at close range, just knocking the entire thing out, exploding the fuel tanks. And if there was a crew member in there, they're no longer alive to be called a crew member. But you now see the Ukrainian tanks, of course with great speed, immediately advancing on the burning husk of that BMP and trying to push the Russians out of the city as fast as possible. Now that was an impressive video. We've never seen a Ukrainian tank that get that close to enemy armor of any kind and then also destroy it. And that was something. That crew was wearing green uniforms when they went into this war, and climbing out of that BMP, they were in brown uniforms for sure, seeing the range at which that tank was at. So an impressive bit of film right there, and it's great to see, although it's incredibly old footage at this point, that at the beginning of the war, the Ukrainians were kicking ass and taking names. Excuse my language, of course, but it was an impressive sight to see, and they were fighting tooth and nail for every single city in the northern area of the country. They're still doing this to this day. Of course, the footage is probably not coming out yet. Much like this footage, it may take a long time for it to. But man, I am really impressed with these Ukrainian tank crews that were in the Chernihiv area at that time. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Chernihiv area, and we're now going to be moving into our location unknowns. And we have a decent amount of news from here as well tonight. Starting off, we can see a Ka-52 firing a guided missile at a Ukrainian vehicle. Of course, losses are taken on both sides in the war, and the Russians always have to show off whenever they get to finally use a guided missile. And by and large, I believe that they take film every single time a helicopter takes flight on, at least in the heads-up display. And so you get a pretty good idea that if they were doing this a lot, we would see a lot of these videos, but this is the first time we've seen a video like this in weeks. So you can get the idea that these kinds of guided missile attacks by Ka-52s are actually pretty rare and highly unlikely. We now see them firing the missile, and it appears that the tank is already smoldering in a way, which shows that it may already be abandoned. Oh yeah, certainly at this point, with it smoking like that, that engine has been burned out, or there's something burning inside the tank, and the Ukrainian crews most likely abandoned the vehicle already. So what we're looking at here is a Ka-52 firing at an empty vehicle. So luckily, with that in mind, most likely no Ukrainians were killed in this attack by the missile. But we can now see that they hit the rear of the vehicle, and it's certainly exacerbated the fire, and is now going to overtake the vehicle very soon. Of course, an unfortunate thing to see, but it's one of the few things we'll see today of the Russians ever claiming a kill on the Ukrainians. Moving on from that, we can see the Ukrainians using a pretty big rifle. When I say big, I mean big. If y'all see, when y'all see this thing here, you're gonna be like, "Wow, that's a big rifle," and that's exactly what I said. I said, "Wow, that's a big rifle." And so here's the footage of the guy aiming the rifle, and then firing it right there. And the gun is so big that it doesn't even have like a normal quick little recoil to the gun. It's almost like pushing him back across the ground. Just look at it. Dang. That is a big gun, and that's a massive suppressor that they put on it as well. Now, let's pull up some information about this Alligator 14.5 gun. I want to know what it was made for, because I don't feel like it was made as an anti-infantry weapon. I feel like it was made as like an anti-tank gun. It's an anti-material rifle. Of course, I believe anything larger than 50 caliber has to be technically an anti-material rifle. I'm not really sure about that, but that is a beast of a gun. That thing actually fires a larger caliber than a 50 caliber Beretta M82, just for those of y'all who might not know what calibers are. The larger the number, like a 12.7 versus a 14.5, the 14.5 is larger in diameter. Because that's what's measuring is the, I guess you could say, the diameter of the bullet. But golly, this thing is big. Apparently, it's 2 meters long. This thing is 6 feet long. It also has a barrel length of about 4 feet. So the barrel makes up most of the length, of course. But maximum firing range, get this. The maximum firing range of this gun is 7 kilometers. Let's go to the map and see what 7 kilometers will look like. Let's actually translate that to miles. 7 kilometers to miles. So it'd be 4.3 miles in range on this thing. And so let's do that on the front lines. Let's say you're in Chernihiv, just for the hell of it, and you wanted to hit a Russian on the other side. So 4.3 miles, that gun could reach out and hit someone about that far away. That's pretty far, and to put that into real context for people who may not get a real scope of what that is. If y'all have ever been to Washington, D.C. or seen the National Mall, if you were to set that gun up in the dome of the Capitol building, just for anyone watching, I'm not saying this is something that should be done, I'm just doing this for comparison. The U.S. Capitol is right here. Let's say you're in the dome, and it fires 4.3 miles. That means that you could be in the dome of the Capitol building and fire all the way into downtown Arlington, Virginia with that gun. And that gives you an idea of the range of this thing and the absolute monster of a gun this thing is. I'm sure you could actually use this against a BMP too. With that, and I'm being serious when I say that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of location unknown news after seeing the absolute mammoth of a rifle that is. And I hope that the Ukrainians use that to great effect. We can now see some British Mastiffs in action. The British have provided a decent amount of equipment to the Ukrainians over the course of this war, and one of those things are these armored cars called Mastiffs. Mastiffs are kind of like the British equivalent of the MRAP, and it was made in response to the Land Rovers that they were using in Iraq getting destroyed pretty frequently. In fact, pretty much all the MRAPs and heavily armored vehicles of the modern day were in response to the war that was kind of fought in Iraq, as well as Afghanistan. Humvees and Land Rovers were incredibly susceptible to IEDs and a death trap to people who were inside of them. And so a lot of countries had to rush to figure out how to make a more bomb-proof vehicle. And so the United States response to IEDs was the MRAP. The British response to IEDs was the Mastiff. And you can see the Ukrainians using them here, and they are mean-looking. We can now see them setting up some mortars and preparing to fire them. And they've made a pretty nice film with these Mastiffs. I think, of course, the main priority of this film that the Ukrainians made was to show off the massive armored cars and show people that the British have provided them with a pretty cool-looking armored vehicle. And not only cool, but as far as we know, it's actually pretty effective as well. So that's the end of the video, but an impressive bit of kit that the British have given the Ukrainians, and I hope that they are able to get more and also use them very well. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a Ukrainian Su-25 fly over. Sadly, I can't play the audio because it's got copyrighted music playing, but what you can see here is an SPG-9 on the ground, and those Ukrainian Su-25s are flying low over the plains and right over their trenches, and we see them give a little wing waggle. A very small one. It's very hard to see, but you can see both of them doing it as they fly over, and it's beautiful to see that the Ukrainian Air Force was never taken out, and the Ukrainian Air Force is still in action and still fighting in the air to this day. The Russians were never able to conquer the Ukrainian air defenses. They were never able to conquer the Ukrainian Air Force either, despite what they want everyone to believe. It's actually almost weekly at this point that some kind of a Russian claim that they finally destroyed the last Ukrainian aircraft, or they own the skies over Ukraine, comes out. And of course, these videos prove that completely untrue, much like every other Russian lie that they've ever said, which is about every time they talk. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a really close call for some Ukrainian soldiers. Of course, can't play the audio, but we can see them riding on top of an APC, and right behind them, an artillery shell slams down in the field just about 100 yards away from them when they were at that point. Just missed them by a hair. It looks like no one was wounded, luckily, by the shrapnel, and now that vehicle is kicking it to get out of there as fast as possible. It was a really close call, and a smart move by the Ukrainians. The Russians would have actually, as far as we see on video, they actually would have stopped once that shell landed and have bailed out of the vehicle and then tried to take cover. That's not really the smart thing to do in a modern war, because once you stop and you're a stationary target, it's going to be much easier for the Russians to hit you than if you were to move. And when you see the Ukrainians practicing the smarter of the two principles and flooring the car and trying to get out of there as fast as possible. So a close call for sure, but it's good to know that everyone made it out alive. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians training a brand new breed of guard dogs. These dogs, although incredibly cute, are incredibly dangerous and will be the future of Ukrainian defenses in terms of their guard dog units.
Саймон, та це свої. Саймон, все. Це свої.
Isn't it just cute? I love dogs. I don't know if y'all know that about me, but I love dogs. Got 2 corgis, and every single dog, especially every single puppy, is just the most precious thing on earth. And so every once in a while I try and include one of these videos, and I hope y'all have enjoyed this one because it was certainly a cute little puppy. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the last bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a family get reunited. Now, I do have to throw in a bit of a complaint. There was actually another video today that showed a soldier and his daughter getting reunited, and I have to say there needs to be a large movement. I hope y'all encourage people to never have music put on videos. It of course leads to a lot of problems on YouTube because we can get copyright striked, and we can't ever just let the moment be the moment. Someone's always trying to put some trashy music over such sweet moments. But moving on to that, we can see this daughter reunited with her father, and you can see just in the picture alone, without needing a video, you can see that she's almost in tears because she has not seen her dad since February 24th, the first day of this war. And this man here has been fighting on the front lines to defend his country ever since 137 days ago. And just today, he was finally able to return and see his daughter for the first time. And this puts it into perspective as to what these Ukrainian soldiers are fighting for. They're fighting for their daughters, their families, their children, and their future. And a lot of Ukrainians are going to be very willing to fight and die if necessary to make sure to defend their families. And the Russians, on the other hand, really have nothing to fight for. And so in that regard, the Ukrainians have all the advantage and all the cards because this man, and I know it because, you know, of course, anyone who's a parent, I'm not one, but this is what everyone says, will lay down their lives for their children. And to think that the Russians could ever make it into this city and possibly torture his wife or kill his daughter is enough for him to know that he'll defend this country until his very last breath. And it's good to know that there are a lot of Ukrainians out there still fighting for their country, and this gives you a good example of why they're still there 137 days later, and they have never given up. With that, it's a beautiful thing to see, and I hope that they have a nice little time together before he has to return to the front and continue to fight to defend them all. With that, we've now reached the end of the Location Unknown news. We're now going to be moving up to the Moscow area and covering the Moscow news, the Kharkiv news, and the northern Donbas news. But before we get to all of that, we're going to take a quick pause for a moment to see how far the fundraiser has made it, our top donors to this fundraiser tonight, and we're also going to answer 3 questions from the chat. After we do that, we'll then be moving on into our next segment of news. And so with that, I'm excited. What do we got?
All right, Enforcer. So we are currently sitting at $3.6 thousand on the fundraiser, and our goal, as everybody knows, is $5,000 tonight. So we still have a little ways to go, but we are over the halfway mark of reaching our goal. If you're not aware, tonight's charity is Doctors Without Borders, a really great charity. Excuse me, I'm stuttering like crazy. But anyways, really great charity that's helping out Ukraine every single day. And of course, they appreciate all the donations and help that everybody's providing. And Enforcer, when you are ready, I do have a list of our top donors, and I can call them out.
Hit it.
All right, and up first, we have a very generous $200 donation from Justin Coleman, a $150 donation from Enforcer for President, really cool username after all.
I like
and
that.
Then we have several $100, yes, indeed. Then we have several $100 donations. We have one from James Reyes. We have one from William Allen. We have one from I'm Your Huckleberry, Zuan Tran, Phil Rogers, and then we have a couple of $50 super chats. We have one from D. Shaw, Redwood Beard, Richard Bell, and Kwai Vincent, or I'm not really sure how to say that, but you know what I'm talking about. Thank you very much for your support, and thank you to everybody for donating to the fundraiser.
And I got to say to all of y'all, thank you so much once again. A lot of the names that we hear in here tonight have been names that have been around a long time on this channel, and y'all have helped us through each and every one of these fundraisers, and have helped me to help out Ukraine, and in the process, we're all helping to win this war in a very small way. And I also want to say that we have just reached $3.9 thousand on this fundraiser. We have almost reached, in 40 minutes on this stream, 80% of the goal of tonight's fundraiser. We're only $1,000 away now from reaching the final goal of tonight, $5,000 raised. And if we're able to do that, we are going to be just $2,000 away from raising $350,000 total in support of Ukraine. And I got to thank you all so much for letting us get here. It's been an impressive thing, and I just got to say, it's honestly unbelievable to me how much support we're able to get Ukraine through these fundraisers every single Sunday without fail. Honestly, at this point, I'm in disbelief while I'm saying this because it's almost impossible for me to process, but I just want you all to know I'm incredibly appreciative and grateful to all of y'all, and I know that the Ukrainians are also grateful as well when they receive the support from Doctors Without Borders, the International Rescue Committee. I'm trying to think of all of the ones that we've done. Revive Soldiers of Ukraine, UNHCR, Humane Society International. We have done so many, I can't even really remember them all anymore, but we have done an unbelievable amount, and I gotta say, it's the most impressive thing that I think I could have ever done. And so thank you all once again, and with that, We're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat, and after we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on into our next segment of news. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right, and before we move into our first question, I want to recognize a $150 donation from Igor. And we have now hit $4,000 on the fundraiser, so we just have 1,000 more to go. And also, I forgot to mention earlier, I also want to recognize all of our other donors. We have recognized our top ones, of course, to give them special recognition since they're putting in a massive amount of help. But all donations, small or large, as we always say every single Sunday, help tremendously and they add up. A lot of people helping is a big deal, and we appreciate it very much. And with that being said, I saw something come across, but I lost it there for the moment. So we will move on to our first question, which is from Douglas Nyquist, who says, Enforcer, do you have information on the U.S. providing the long-range ammo for the HIMARS?
Sadly, at this moment, we don't have any news or updates as to whether that's being sent over or has made it over. So sadly, to kind of answer that question in brief, I don't have any information on that at the moment, but we're still trying to find it because we did get an indication that it is going to be sent over eventually. It's just that we weren't really given a timetable when, and we also haven't gotten any follow-ups on that since. So I hope that answers the question in a way, and with that, we're on to the next one.
All right, and up next we have a question from Super Action General, who says, Enforcer, who is your favorite character and why? Is it Professor Mortar, Moscow Mike, Mr. Lunchtime, Don, or maybe somebody else?
My favorite character is... That's a tough one. We have a lot of characters on the stream that have been created out of nothing, which is always funny. They always just somehow spring up. I would say that my favorite character is Mr. Lunchtime, because Mr. Lunchtime was kind of our original character, in a way. Moscow Mike isn't really a character, he's a person, and so... Well, you know, Mr. Lunchtime's also a person too, but Moscow Mike is actually someone we know. You know, he's a neighbor, so you know, that's kind of one I'm like, you know, like, and honestly, I'd asked him before he came on the stream. I was like, okay, what talking points are you going to have? And he told me an entirely different set of talking points off stream before it started. And then he came on and said something completely different, which miffed me. Honestly, I'm not really a big fan. So I would go with Mr. Lunchtime, because Mr. Lunchtime is hilarious. Everyone makes loads of jokes about them. Actually, throw that up as a poll, Matthew, if you can. Who is everyone's favorite character? Professor Mortar, Mr. Lunchtime, Moscow Mike, or Don? Because I would like to see what everyone else thinks, because in my opinion, it's Mr. Lunchtime. Mr. Lunchtime is our OG character, the first one I consider a character, and he holds a special place in my heart because everyone made so many hilarious jokes about him. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. And with that, we're going to go on to our last question of the segment after Matthew puts up that poll, and we'll answer that one, and then we'll move on to our next segment of news in the Moscow, Kharkiv, and northern Donbas areas.
All right, and that poll will be going up just momentarily. And up next, we have a question from Daniel McDonald, who says, question, do y'all think Russia will bow up to the U.S. anymore? And thank you guys for the news once again from Gun Barrel City, Texas.
And thank you so much for the question, but real quick, Matthew, could you reread that first part for me real quick?
He said, do y'all think Russia will bow or bow up to the U.S. anymore?
Bow up. Well, that's a... Yes, they will. To answer that the shortest I can, just get a really quick answer. Yes, they will. The Russians are never going to stop bowing up, and I've never actually heard anyone say that on a stream yet, but that's something we commonly say here in the South, is bowing up on someone. But they are definitely going to bow up again. That's just what they do. And since Russia is trying to reassert themselves as a world power, although they've never really been successful yet, that's also always going to include bowing up against their rivals. And much like the United States, China is kind of a rival to them, although they're kind of on easy terms. In fact, China is kind of on economically good terms with everyone. They export loads to the United States, loads to everyone else. They're also buying a lot of Russian materials and trade with them a decent bit, along with the Europeans. And so while the Russians, of course, are not on good terms with the Chinese, much like us, economically and trading-wise, they look like they are. But still, they bow up against everyone because they're trying to assert themselves as world power with their own sphere of influence. So I think that they would continue to bow up as long as Putin's in charge, and maybe even afterwards. If he did get overthrown and replaced, there may be a new kind of Russian sentiments that would lead them to try and bow up against everyone else. So I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we have reached the end of this question segment. We're now going to move on to the Moscow news, the Kharkiv news, and the northern Donbas news. And I just have to say, when we get to this next question segment, I'm really excited to see how far this fundraiser will have made it. Will we have made it to 5,000 by that point? I don't really know. I hope we will. But of course, we'll just wait and see. So without further ado, we're going to go to Moscow, where we heard on TV today, on Russian TV, they are actually talking about stealing the food straight out of Ukraine and what they're going to do with it. So let's pull up this video. Let's watch it. And there's a text-to-speech translation at the bottom. I really butchered that one. And I think y'all may be able to see this. We're going to give it a second just so that way it can pop up on my preview over here on the left side, so that way I can make sure, because if it doesn't, then I have to read it over. So let me see if that's going to happen. I'm just waiting for myself to click the link 30 seconds backwards in time, and now I'm getting ready to click on the video over there, and now I'm putting it full screen. Y'all will actually be able to read it. And so here's the video, and I'm going to unmute it and just let y'all see what they have to say.
Вот в Херсонской области, которая, как известно, аграрная область, аграрный край, там уже начинает поспевать урожай. Вот весь мир переживает, что будет продовольственный кризис. Слава богу, нам переживать об этом незачем. Более того, мы можем с миром поделиться с теми из этого мира, кто будет вести себя прилично. Правда же? Кому-то мы можем продать, кому-то мы можем просто помочь. Мы, слава богу, можем себе это позволить, потому что у нас, в отличие от Индии и США, у которых в этом году засухи, слава богу, не было, у нас, ну, как нормально, и виды на урожай у нас, Бог даст, хорошие.
Рекордные планируются.
Ну вот сейчас созрела эта редисочка в Херсонской области, молоденькая картошечка, зелень. Им надо ее куда-то сбывать. На этом зиждется их благополучие, их экономика, они этим живут. Они, как нам рассказывают, мне рассказывают военкоры наши, которые приезжают оттуда и общаются с людьми на месте, они очень рассчитывают, чтобы можно это было сбывать в Крым.
Did y'all pick up on that part in the middle where she said,
Да, прилично.
we can share with the world with those from the world that would behave appropriately? That sounds like blackmail, doesn't it? It sounds like they're going to sit there and say, hey, if you don't align with Russian beliefs, we're not going to feed you, or we're not going to give you the food to be able to eat. So they're literally saying, you're either with us or you starve to the countries that will be relying on this food. And those countries can be actually pretty sizable. There's a lot of Middle Eastern countries, and I believe Saudi Arabia is actually included in that category of countries that rely on Ukrainian food imports. And so if, for example, Saudi Arabia is threatened, you're either on our side or you starve. Their foreign policies are going to start leaning heavily towards the Russian side, and that may become important for the United States. That may actually lead us to have rising food prices here, because imagine this. We're not going to want the Saudis to starve, and if we make them align themselves with the Russians because they're, being threatened with starvation, we're going to have to do something as the United States to try and keep Saudi Arabia, although Saudi Arabia is a really questionable thing and a really controversial topic because they're really not America's friends, but at the same time we like to pretend they are. We're not going to want them to go all the way Russian, and so we're going to try and support them in some way. And so we may start exporting food from the United States to then be sent over to Saudi Arabia, so that way they'll keep in our pocket instead of the Russians' pocket due to the threat of not getting food. That could also expand to other countries, but really honestly, Egypt's a bit of a conundrum on its own. That's something for a whole other time. I think we'll try and make a video on that in the future, because Egypt is a really weird and wonky country right now. That also includes a lot of other African countries, and so we might start to see, kind of like in the Cold War, the Russians are going to try and extend their tendrils into Africa, perhaps in the Middle East, and start causing problems and issues there because of them pretty much holding their food imports hostage. So pretty interesting little situation here. Of course, we're going to be trying to keep an eye on this as it progresses, but we can already see on TV the Russians are talking about what they're going to do and how they're going to apportion the stolen food from Ukraine. And in fact, they sat there and said, oh, a lot of the local farmers would just like to sell it to Crimea. Do you really believe that for a minute? Does anyone? I don't. Because now they're making it sound like, of course, they've liberated the Ukrainians, and now all of them within Russian-occupied territory can live in peace and harmony, and these farmers want to help out the poor, impoverished Crimeans who've been subjugated by the Ukrainians for years. But the problem with that fact is that the Russians have been controlling Crimea for about 8 years at this point, and so if they were starving or suffering or anything, that was on the Russians, not really the Ukrainians. So a little interesting kind of a lie there, of course, that the Russians are trying to portray, and some pretty low-down Russian policies right there, I would definitely have to say. With that, we're now going to be moving out of Russia and away from that stupidity that's called Moscow. We're now going to be moving down to the area of the Kherson pocket, where today we saw the 40th Brigade doing a little bit more target practice. We're almost always seeing the 40th Brigade doing something in this area, and today's no exception. They do have copyrighted music on the video, but here's the video of Ukrainian artillery slamming down on the Russians, just making sure that they keep their artillery practice at a regular interval. We can see the M777 firing, and the shell lands, and has already hit dead onto a Russian vehicle as the fire has already started, and the tank has been destroyed. You can now see the artillery still raining down in the area, of course, inflicting damage on the vehicles. There's not really much to add to this. Of course, this is a self-explanatory video. It's just the 40th Brigade, of course, showing us what excellence looks like. So, great thing to see. And with that, that is the end of the video. And it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainians are still inflicting casualties on the Russians in the Kharkiv pocket. With that, we're now going to be moving down to the area of Kharkiv City, where we actually have a little bit of news that I find interesting, and I do believe this is an important time to touch on this. Ukraine is in the right, and I am 100% pro-Ukrainian, but one would be amiss to say that Ukraine didn't have some corruption problems before the war, and one would hope that during these kinds of trying times for the nation, that corruption would subside and people would do what is best for the nation. It appears that some police officers in the Kharkiv area decided that their corruption would not end when the war began, and decided to try and extort passerbys on the highway for 300 hryvnias each, which I hope is the correct way to pronounce the Ukrainian currency, to pass, and if they didn't give up that money, they would then be arrested, or they would not be allowed to pass the checkpoint. Now, just because there's corruption doesn't mean that Ukraine is in the wrong. And also another thing that I'd like to point out here is that while we are about to watch a video of Ukrainian cops being corrupt, one would be amiss to say that every country doesn't have a level of corruption in it. The United States is no exception, along with Russia, China, the United Kingdom, Germany, France. There's always a level of corruption everywhere. But this kind of corruption, and especially affecting people's lives as they're trying to escape from a war zone, is not good by any means. And we're about to watch the Ukrainian army decide that they've had enough of this, and they're going to go out there to this road where the cops are and hold them at gunpoint and arrest them for extorting civilians. With that, here's the video of the Ukrainian army being the, I guess you could say, arbiter of justice it has been pretty much during the entirety of the war, and arresting these corrupt cops outside of Kharkiv. And so, here's the video. This is also a body cam of a Ukrainian soldier. Now, right there, this man pulled over. I'm gonna kind of explain what's happening here. The man that's pulled over here in the Lada has apparently been extorted by these cops before, and so he's pulled over and he's told the military, it's that guy right there, you know, talking about the cop. And so here's how the Ukrainian army responds to extortion.
Сюда иди, блядь. Сюда нахуй. Руки, блядь. Руки, сука. Руки, блядь. Руки, нахуй. Руки. Руки. Ложись, блядь, задержи. Ложись, сука. Ложись, сука, блядь. Лежать, придурок. Руки, нахуй. Лежать. Руки, блядь. Руки. Руки. Ты чё, блядь? Пусти, пожалуйста. Руки, придурки. Попали, придурки, блядь. Попали, придурки, блядь.
We can now see the actions of this cop finally catching up to him. He's now realizing that extorting civilians wasn't actually the best thing to do.
Оружие, блядь. Руки, Саш. Руки за голову, я сказал. Шо, блядь, в карман? Курение, нахуй. Морда вниз, сука, сказал. Я, сука, сделал. Морда вниз, блядь. Морду вниз. Сука, ты война, нахуй, ты бабки брать будешь. Я не брать.
What a video. And it was beautiful to see that corruption does not always go unpunished. That's something that happens everywhere. And of course, in a country like Ukraine, it was actually kind of known before the war that there was a decent level of corruption everywhere. But once again, I've got to say, as a counter to that, there's corruption everywhere, of course, on different levels and some worse than others. But this kind of corruption right here, I consider the worst. For police to pretty much extort 300 hryvnias. Let me see how that's actually pronounced real quick, so that way I can make sure to get that right. Pronunciation.
Hryvnias.
Hryvnias. Okay. 300 hryvnias from each person is a crime in itself. And of course, people always take advantage of the positions they're given. That also happens here in the United States. Not to get into a lot of details, but we've had run-ins. Well, actually, I will get into some detail. We went up to the Brownsbury nuclear power plant to try and film a video. We've pretty much given up on that one at this point, just to let everyone know. But we went up there, and the security guards at that facility, being company guards, company security officers that are armed, came off the property and threatened us off property. That in itself is illegal, but of course, that's the level of corruption that you get when you give someone a gun and a little title like hall guard or something like that. They're going to come and start abusing their power. And we can see these Ukrainian cops here doing just that. Now, the great thing is that the army, usually during martial law, this is always something that people don't expect, but the army is usually better at administering the law than the police in countries where the army already is not the police. And so you usually see the army stepping up and cracking down on cops that are corrupt wherever they may be. And, you know, during the U.S. in the Civil War and afterwards in the Reconstruction, most people went to the army to solve disputes and not the local police, because you could count on the army to do what was right by and large. So we saw right there these cops finally being held accountable, and it's good to know that there are Ukrainians in Ukraine, like the army, that will hold these people accountable, and I hope they get a harsh punishment for abusing their positions. It's something that happens all over the world, and there's a lot of examples of it, sadly, here in the United States as well, and I believe that people who abuse their positions to get some kind of gain out of it should face far more harsher punishment than an average person who took advantage of a situation. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Kharkiv area and away from that great news where we actually saw order and justice being upheld in Ukraine, which is a beautiful sight to see. And we're now going to be moving down towards the Balaklia area. We have not gotten any news from Chernihiv, but the Balaklia area has proved a little bit more eventful as the 93rd Brigade destroyed even more Russian tanks again today. We can see a T-72B3 right here, and what appears to be another T-72 flipped over. And I don't really know how it got that way, but we can also see a third T-72 in this ravine as well. And they look like they're all abandoned. 3 intact tanks. One of them slipped over. That, of course, will have to be dealt with. Well, actually, take that back. No intact tanks from what we can tell. Apparently, one of them's on fire. But we could see what appears to be one intact tank over here, and the Ukrainians might actually be able to recover these and repurpose them to be used in their own military. And I hope that's the case, because it's impressive to see the Russians abandon so many tanks consistently and also just leave them there so that in running order where the Ukrainians can just walk up to them, turn them on, and drive them off. Of course, wonderful to see. And I hope we see more of this, because the 93rd Brigade has been doing a lot of work in this quiet area of the front near Balaklia, and has been inflicting massive casualties in terms of the Russians' armor that's in the area. With that, we're now going to be moving past the Izium area, where we have no video evidence to speak of. We're also going to be moving past the Sloviansk area, where of course the Liman area has fallen largely silent. I believe at this point, although we haven't gotten enough video evidence to show it, the Russians have made it to the Seversky Donets River, but the river is a massive obstacle. The bridge has been blown up that crosses the river, and so the Russians are practically stuck here, and I wouldn't doubt that we will never hear news from this area again until the Russians, if they ever do, actually push towards Sloviansk from the west. It's practically impossible for them to cross the river, and so I assume that they would not try that again. Although the Russians are stupid, they may. So with that, we're now going to be moving to the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area, and now you can see the actual reflection, and this is why I base my analysis a lot off of video evidence and how much there is of it. We heard Putin say that the forces in this area were going to halt and rest, supposedly, and you can now see this reflected in the video evidence. Day after day, the amount of videos we've gotten from the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area has gotten smaller and smaller until we only have one video today, and it's not even on the front lines. And so that's why, just to explain to some people who wonder, why do I put so much faith in the videos? You can get an idea of how much activity is going on anywhere around the country based off of how many videos can be located to a single area. And based off the videos we've gotten today, we can see that the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area has literally ground to a complete halt, and there's no activity occurring here at all, really. So with that, we're now going to move into this clip, the only clip we've gotten from the Severodonetsk and Lysychansk area, showing Ukrainian artillery in action, and it was doing a pretty cool looking job. It was, of course, a peon, and we can see it firing here. And so, here's the video. Oh man, they're playing the trash music. Let me mute that. Man, those peons, when they fire, they are really something to watch. It's wonderful to see Ukrainian artillery still in operation in this area, and it's good to know that the Ukrainians are still giving the Russians, you know, a little piece of the action bit by bit, even though this area has largely become quiet. With that, we're now going to be moving down into the Bakhmut and Chasiv Yar area, which is going to be the last bits of news we have from the northern Donbas area. Moving into Bakhmut today, we did see an unfortunate sight where houses had been hit in the outskirts of Bakhmut, and apparently 7 houses were burned to the ground after incendiary munitions were used on the outskirts of the city. Here's the video.
І пішов дощ.
You see the damage that's been caused to these houses. And we don't know if people were inside or not. We don't know if people have been wounded. And for some reason there, just for y'all to know my brain processes, when I saw this hashtag right then, I thought it said Stow Prussia. And then I was like, oh, it's Stop Russia. Sorry, I just had to say that because I was wondering if some of y'all also saw Prussia instead of Russia for a second there. But with that, of course, getting back to the seriousness of the matter, it is unfortunate to see that more houses have burned down. And this is damage that will have to be rebuilt after the war, and more families that have been displaced from their homes just because the Russians decided on a whim to invade Ukraine. With that, we're now going to be moving on to the news outside of Bakhmut, but very nearby, and almost what can be considered a suburb of Bakhmut, and the town of Chasiv Yar. In Chasiv Yar, we saw the Ukrainian soldiers moving through the town, and we saw an incredibly close, near miss with a Russian ballistic missile that slammed right into an apartment block right near the soldiers. There's not really much to comment, it's very self-explanatory beyond that, and so I'm just going to let y'all see the video.
Jesus, fuck, man, those are civilian buildings.
Yeah, civilian building. Это было целое здание. Блядь! Сука! Ебаный в рот!
This explosion you're seeing on film buried dozens of people inside the rubble of a residential building. Of course, the Ukrainians do not leave these people to rot inside these buildings, and they do begin recovery operations to, of course, evacuate the bodies. Usually when a situation like this happens, the rescue crews go into it largely knowing that no one is going to make it out of this alive. But there was a silver lining to this story today, as the Ukrainians heard a cry from the rubble, and there was one man that made it out alive. He's probably the luckiest man in that entire city, and it was an absolute blessing that the Ukrainian first responders were able to hear this man through that rubble and save him. And so here's the video of them getting the one man out who was alive. And while it's of course unfortunate to know that several dozen people were killed, it is always a celebration to know that at least one man was able to be saved and survived from it. And so here's the video.
Живой!
Подай звук, дай звук. А ну на, мы это уберем. Пусть попробует один. На, день каску, братан, на всякий случай, она не помешает. Не надо, ну будут кирпичи лететь.
Может чуть-чуть нырнуть туда и помочь ему.
А нет, там нереально.
Нереально.
Давайте сюда ближе.
And there's the man, and they got him out alive.
Вот это? Давай, одеяло накрой. Давай, я держу. А можешь его сложить, понял? Они сейчас сами будут проходить. Туда уводи дальше, да. А колено складывай на коленка, в другой коленке, нос как ножка. Левой ноге, руками помогай, руками. Вот, красавчик. Все, потихоньку. Отойдите сюда. Давайте одеяло. За меня держись. Давай.
And he's now on a stretcher, and they got one out alive. It's a beautiful scene to see, and I bet it's a massive reprieve to these first responders. For the rest of this day, they'll most likely be pulling dead bodies out of this rubble, but for this one moment, it is seriously a moment of celebration for these men. And it's something important to note, and something that Americans actually have a lot of experience with, specifically as an example in 9/11. Just for those of y'all who do not know the emotional toll that can sometimes be taken on these first responders here by never finding live people inside of these buildings. In 9/11, of course, several thousand people died in that attack, and the first responders had to go through all of the rubble that was left at the foundations of both of the Twin Towers, and they had to try and find people who were alive. They found almost no one. There, I believe, out of the entire area where the foundations once were, I believe they only found around 3 or 4 people who were alive. And so it got incredibly depressing for the crews. It got very depressing for everyone involved. In fact, they had to do something for the dogs. It was getting so bad. They were finding so few people, and it was such a depressing sight to just see that no one survived, and there wasn't even a trace of human existence amongst the rubble, that some of the firefighters had to bury themselves in the rubble for the dogs to find, so that way they could even try and keep the dog spirits up in such a depressing moment. And I know that a lot of firefighters here are having to deal with this kind of stuff because everyone's human here in these situations in Ukraine. And I know that it must be a massive celebration for them to find even one person alive in the rubble out of all of these buildings that have been hit in Ukraine and destroyed by the Russians. And so, of course, it's an incredible thing to see, worth celebrating, and it is just beautiful to know that people, even during the darkest of times, can find silver linings and have some luck and are able to manage to survive such harrowing situations. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the northern Donbas area, and we're now going to start moving down to the southern Donbas area, the Southern Front news, along with the news in Dnipro, and then finally, one bit of very important, very big international news, and the speech from President Zelenskyy. Before we get to all of that news, we're going to take a quick pause, and we're going to see how far the fundraiser has made it, and we're also going to answer 3 questions from the chat and recognize some of our largest donors to this fundraiser tonight. And so with that, what do we have, Matthew?
And Enforcer, I am very proud to report that we have hit that $5,000 goal, and we are now $500 over goal, and that calls for a yeah!
Yay! That is great. That's wonderful. That's really impressive. We made it to $5.5 thousand. We're now $500 over the goal, and we're only $1.5 thousand away from raising a round even number of $350,000 in support of Ukraine. This is incredible, and I got to thank you all so much once again for helping us to get this far with these fundraisers, and of course, just being impressive and wonderful members of the Elite Spring Army. Tonight's been a blowout. It's been wonderful, and I thank you all so much for helping and letting us get to that fundraiser goal. If y'all want to still support, the fundraiser is, of course, open. We may have reached that goal, but that does not mean that you can no longer donate to the fundraiser. So if you'd like to, please do so. But we have reached the $5,000 goal for the night, and if that isn't worth celebrating, I don't know what is. The Elite Spring Army did it again, and I am more than proud to say that I am the guy who pretty much made the Elite Spring Army come to be on this thing through the streams, and that all of you wonderful people are here watching this news and helping us to raise all of these funds in support of Ukraine. I thank you all once again. I know Doctors Without Borders would thank you all if they could, and all of the Ukrainians that will be under the scalpel of these surgeons that are being supported through our fundraisers would also thank you as well for helping them to get through such a harrowing situation. And so thank you all once again for the incredible amount of support. It is absolutely impressive. And with that, we're now going to recognize our top donors for the night in between the last question segment and this one. And then we're going to answer 3 questions from the chat. And so with that, who are our biggest donors in between then and now that got us over the goal?
And yes, it is now time to recognize our top donors, and golly, do we have a few of them. So up first, we have a $150 donation from Rick McGee. We have a $100 donation from Dima Tikachenko. Then we have a $50 donation from Igor and Sharon Alaminsky, Sharon Tikalski, Ruben Coolidge, and Vic H. So those are the top donors for the moment. And I see that many people are still donating. We are now $600 above our goal. So big thanks to everyone. And thank you so much for all donations, small and large, once more.
And I got to thank you all once again. It's impressive that we've made it to 5.6, and hopefully we can make it on to 6K. Of course, there's no pressure at this point. We did reach the goal. And so if you are feeling a little pressure, just sit back and relax. We've reached the goal. There's nothing to worry about for the rest of the night. But if you want to help us get to that extra goal of 6K, please feel more than free to donate, because it will only help out Ukraine even more. And of course, it adds to everyone in the Elite Spring Army's level of pride to know that we were able to make it that much further. So with that, thank you all once again. And we're now going to answer 3 questions from the chat. And after we do that, we'll then move into the rest of the news for the night.
And let me give a quick shout out to Ashley, who put in a $50 donation just a moment ago. Thank you very much for that. And also, let's see here, let me make sure I didn't miss anything. Yes, and that's the top donations for the moment. And thank you to everyone who is still donating, because I still see the donations just rolling in like crazy. So absolutely tremendous, and thank you very much. And moving on to our first question of the segment, which goes to LT Dubs, who says, Enforcer, beyond obvious human costs, have you seen any data speaking to estimates on the amount of pollution, garbage, and new resource extraction resulting from the senseless war? Slava Ukraine.
Unfortunately, I have not. I did see some people talking about that every once in a while. But of course, the wars just produce a lot of, I guess you could say, waste. And so I don't know if anyone's actually going around cataloging it or trying to get any kind of estimate on it. But sadly, I haven't heard specifically about that information on here. One other thing that y'all may find interesting that I found just bizarre today is that there was actually a colony of European bison near Kharkiv that had to be moved out of there at the start of the war. Why we never heard about that on the stream, I don't know. But one thing that was crazy to me was to find out that Europe actually has bison. If y'all didn't know, in World War II, the Germans actually had a little tank, the bison tank. We'll just call it the bison tank. It was pretty much like an SPG, but this is what it looked like. And every time I heard about this tank, I always thought it was talking about the American bison, because everyone knows about the buffalo here in the United States. But what's crazy is that there's 2 different kinds of bison, and Europeans actually knew about bison before they came to the Americas, because bison existed in Europe. They're actually called European bison. I'll pull one up for y'all and let y'all see a look at this thing. These things went extinct in the wild in 1927, but recently they've been trying some repopulation efforts to get these things back into the wild all around Europe, and they seem to be largely successful. They're having a lot of progress with it. And that's what a European bison looks like. And when you compare it to an American bison, they're almost the same. They're very similar. So let me pull up an American bison and show you all that. Of course, the symbol of the United States, everyone knows about the bison, but that's what a European bison looks like. Very similar. Didn't actually know until just about yesterday that that Europe had bison in it at a point. I thought that was just an exclusively American beast, but apparently it was also a European one as well. But there was a population of European bison that have to be moved out, and it was one of the conservation efforts where they're trying to repopulate the wilds and the forests of Europe with these indigenous and beautiful creatures. Really, they're honestly impressive. I have seen American bison in person, and it is really a sight to behold when you see these things. They're larger than a car, and they weigh about as much as a freight train. And so with that, I hope that kind of does answer the question in a way, at least in the background things that a lot of people haven't been thinking about. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question. I hope that kind of was an interesting tidbit. It didn't really answer the trash side of things, but I hope it kind of answered the animal conservation and wildlife management side of stuff. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
All right, and just real quick, I want to give a shout out to Sampo Sorella for putting in a $50 donation. Thank you very much for that. And moving on to our next question, we have one from Happy Dragon, who says, Enforcer, I learned something new today and thought perhaps you might like to enlighten the Leaf Spring Army on the difference between a rocket and a missile as it pertains to artillery.
A great question, and that's actually a very good one. There never really was a difference in history in between a rocket and a missile. You could pretty much describe them as one and the same throughout all of history, but then in modern times, something happened. Rockets began to guide themselves, and so there was a bit of an identity crisis as to what in the world that thing is called. Is it called a guided rocket? Is it called a guided missile? And so that is where the distinction started to form. And so in the modern world, a rocket is an unguided projectile. It's like an Estes rocket. You light the end. It's kind of aimed in the general direction of somewhere, and you launch it, and it starts flying towards that direction. It has absolutely no guidance from any kind of computer or from the ground or a wire, and so it's a rocket. A rocket is unguided. A missile, on the other hand, has some kind of input into it, and it's being guided by something, whether that be a computer, a man with a controller, or what. A missile is always going to be guided. If you notice, a Grad fires 112 millimeter rockets. I believe that's the caliber for them. And any MLRS is firing rockets. But if you ever look at something like an Iskander or a Tachka or a Tomahawk, they're always called missiles. And that's the distinction, is that those cruise missiles are guided, but the rockets from the MLRSs are not. So that's kind of the distinction in between the two. And I hope that kind of does give a better explanation, because that took me a while to learn. When I was a kid, I always wondered what in the world is the difference in between a rocket and a missile, and it actually took me a while to figure that out. So with that, I hope that does answer your question. I hope that enlightens everyone who may have not known what the difference in between a rocket and a missile is. Now y'all might know. And so with that, thank you so much for that question. It was very good to clarify, and so I thank you for asking that. That was a great question. And with that, we're going to move on to the last question of this segment, and then we're going to start moving back through the rest of our news for the night.
And I want to give a shout out to D. Shaw for putting in a $160 donation to Docs Without Borders. And D. Shaw, that is very generous, and thank you very much for that donation. And moving on to our last question of the segment, we have a question from Santiago Flores, who says, Enforcer, has Putin activated any units around Moscow and Petersburg area, or is he only sending units from the poor regions of Russia?
As far as we know, the information I've been able to get behind the scenes, because I have occasionally read news articles about that kind of stuff. A lot of Western news outlets, and I'm not really sure if this is true or not. There's a lot of agendas that news has these days. A lot of them are saying that most of Russia's military units that are being used in Ukraine have come from the Far East and are made up of the ethnic minorities of Russia, like the Siberians, the Mongols, the Tuvans, and so on. And so I think, if we were to base it off of that information that we've gotten from the news and take that with a grain of salt, the Russians are largely using Far East units that are now in Ukraine, and they haven't really mobilized a lot of, I guess you could say, the European Russians from, say, St. Petersburg, Moscow, Nizhny Novgorod, Kursk, and so on, all the other cities that are in Western Russia. Of course, that would be that can't be entirely true, though, because if you look at the population breakup of Russia, about 100 million of them live in Western Russia, and the other 30 million or so live in the rest of Russia. So I think that there would have to be some, of course, Western Russian units that are in Ukraine, and when we see videos sometimes from the Russians, a lot of them do look like the wider Slavic Western Russian people that make up that area. And so I would assume that a decent amount, well, some of them are, but then again, about half of them could be made up of the Far East provinces, which may be showing that the Russians are trying to send all of the, I guess you could call them non-Slavic Russians into the war to be killed off and try and deplete their numbers through artificial means, kind of like what the Russians did with the Holodomor to Ukraine in the 30s during Soviet times. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question, but then again, take that with a grain of salt because I'm not entirely sure if it's true. That's all based off of speculation and assumptions. We don't really know a lot about the Russian units, where they're coming from, or even their names. The Russians have been keeping that a pretty closely kept secret as best as they can, and so we really don't have a breakup of where these units have come from. We can only base our assumptions off of what we see on video. And of course, one would be amiss to never talk about Donetsk and Luhansk, where we can see a massive amount of Russia's manpower is pretty much from these two breakaway regions, and they just send them wherever they need extra men and also treat them like dogs as well. And so it may actually be the Russian policy, with that in mind, to pretty much send everyone rather than the Russian, and put that in the quotations, the Russians from the west of the country. Really everyone in Russia at this point is a Russian. They've controlled the Far East for about 200 years at this point, and so they're about as Russian as everyone else in actual Western Russia. But with that, I hope that does answer the question. Of course, that's the best of my knowledge. It may be incorrect, it may not be. And also, one other thing before we move out of the question segment is that we saw a lot of people in the comments saying, well, I guess the HIMARS aren't, missiles, they're rockets, although they're guided. I don't know what the HIMARS rockets fall under. I don't even know if they're called HIMARS rockets. They may be missiles because they are guided. But I'm not really sure. Let's actually pull it up. HIMARS missiles. So they call it a rocket system, but what's the ammunition called? Is it called a rocket or a missile? The MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System is a surface-to-surface missile manufactured by the U.S. Defense Company. And so while the HIMARS is called the High Mobility Artillery Rocket System, the actual ammunition is a missile by Army definition, which does continue with the precedent that anything that has some kind of I guess you could say smart guidance in it does qualify it as a missile and not a rocket. So that precedent, that naming precedent, does still stand, and I hope that cleared that up for everyone in the chat, because they are guided and therefore they do fall under the qualification of a missile in modern terms. Also pretty cool right there. I was actually kind of confused about that as well, because it does say rocket system in the name HIMARS, but apparently the missile is a missile, not a rocket. So apparently a little bit of a naming crisis there. And also, real quick before we move on, one last thing. The HIMARS missiles were actually designed at the Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, Alabama. Alabama wins again. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the question segment. I hope that cleared up a lot of stuff and also answered some interesting topics for everyone, because that was actually a pretty interesting debate everyone was having, is that the HIMARS may be using rockets instead of missiles. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of the question segment. We'll once again move into one at the end of the stream, but for now, we're going to continue the rest of our news in the southern Donbas, the southern front, Dnipro, as well as Crimea. Then we're going to move out to some massive international news in Slovakia, and finally return to Kyiv to cover the speech from President Zelenskyy. After we do that, we'll once again move into a question segment where we'll try and answer as many questions as possible, and then we will, just pretty much run out the rest of the stream as a question segment. But with that, we're now moving into Donetsk, and speaking of HIMARS, I think the Russians are doing the opposite of hi, and they're saying bye to the ammunition depots that they've been building up in Donetsk and Luhansk for years. We've seen that another ammo depot in the area of Chernihiv has once again caught on fire and exploded today. We also got reports, although I didn't include this on the stream tonight, that a Russian reporter, a journalist on Twitter, if they're even allowed on Twitter, I'm not really sure, so I don't know how true this is, so take this with a grain of salt. He has said that something like 12 ammunition depots have been destroyed within the past 3 days by the HIMARS system, as well as dozens of command posts and communication centers. And so going off of that, oh, look at the sprinkles out there, that's like a sparkler. Going off of that, we can get the idea that the Russians are in a very bad condition, especially because the HIMARS, they're destroying everything that's making the front lines function. The supplies, the command, and the communications sectors, which without the front line cannot really operate at all. So the HIMARS is doing a lot of damage, suffice to say, and now the Russians are even admitting it. And of course, in that post, I believe the guy was starting to talk about, oh, the United States ought to be held accountable for directly interfering in our war by sending these things over. And so that added a lot of validity to it, because of course the Russians have to put a spin on it somehow to make it America's fault. But with that, it's great to see more ammunition depots on fire, and that was not the only video we got today. In the nearby town that's pretty much connected right to Chernihiv, in the nearby town of Chistyakove, we saw another ammo depot blowing up today. So 2 ammunition depots on film were hit and destroyed, and this one went up like a small nuclear bomb. And so here's the video. A little bit of a mushroom cloud out there. The boom will reach them soon, I believe. That's the end of the video, but a second ammunition depot hit, and these are so far behind the lines that there's only 2 things that could have done this. Either a ballistic missile or a HIMARS, which is, of course, still using missiles. So, in either regard, the Ukrainians are starting to cause massive disarray and problems behind the front lines in pretty much all of the supporting functions that are required to keep a front line coherent. And if this continues on, the Russians may be so disorganized behind the lines that they can't organize anything on the front lines and continue on offensives. If they get more HIMARS, they might be able to throw so much confusion across the Russian lines in such a massive swath that it may become possible for the Ukrainians to cover large amounts of ground, because the front lines will be so disoriented, confused, and undersupplied. So with that, it's great to see so many ammo depots blowing up in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And with that, we're now going to move to the area of Marinka, where we saw a MiG-29, a Ukrainian MiG-29, looking down at the battlefield and all the fires that had been caused in a village. Now, we know that this is wartime footage, of course, because of the smoke and the burning in the distance, but also because this MiG-29 has a complete loadout of air-to-air missiles. You can see what appears to be R-60s here, although I think they're AA-12s. Not really sure about that, though. And we also see another missile here. That actually looks a lot like an R-60. Let me pull that up. R-60 missile. Let's just take a look at one and see if they are close. AAA Aphid, so that's what... I mean, like, that's kind of close, but not quite. Ah, man, I feel like it's a more modern missile. Anyways, that's getting sidetracked. We can see this pilot flying over the battlefield and looking down at the damage. That's really the point of this video. So you can see it right there. And it's wonderful to know that the Ukrainian aircraft still patrol the skies and are looking for a unsuspecting Russian plane to shoot down. With that, we're now going to move out of the Donbas area, because that's all the news we have to report there. And of course, the front line has fallen into a stalemate here, and no advances have been made by either side. We do know that the Ukrainians apparently made it into the Kievsky district suburbs, but beyond that, we don't really have a lot of information to follow up with. So, with that, we're now moving out of that area of the front, and we're now moving towards the Zaporizhia front line, where today we saw some Azov soldiers come under fire in the middle of talking. How rude of the Russians to interrupt these soldiers, and I hope that they pay for it. Here's the video.
Да блин, ну это арташ, ну как бы. Не знаю. Такое.
We now hear the artillery fire coming in. We see the Azov ducking for cover to make sure that they don't get hit by any incoming shrapnel if it does hit.
Это уже было близко.
We can now see him picking up his helmet, and also little American flag. Didn't notice that there for a second, but that's nice to see. But with that, that's the end of the video, and it was very rude of the Russians to interrupt these soldiers, and I hope that the Ukrainians respond in kind with some counter battery fire to let the Russians know that no one's really appreciative of that kind of crap. With that, we're now going to be moving further down the front lines, and we're now going to be moving towards the area past Kharkiv, where we saw a massive crop fire. Crop fires are starting to become common all across Ukraine. The wheat is starting to ripen, and when crops ripen, that's about the driest they ever get. And so they become very susceptible to fires, and we can see here in this video a massive weed fire unfolding in the fields. Unfortunate to see, and these crops being destroyed could potentially feed hundreds if not thousands of people, and that food will now be completely wiped from the potential of being sent anywhere around the world. And it's just a sad thing to see, and it shows the unfortunate side of war, because regardless of however I would like to phrase this, I would like to blame the Russians for this. This could also equally be caused by the Ukrainians. Wheat is just so fragile at this time in its lifespan that really anything can cause a massive wheat fire. This happens a lot in the United States as well occasionally. And so it's just the unfortunate reality of war that if a war is going on near a ripe wheat field, it's a pretty high chance that this stuff could just catch on fire and just burn to the ground, and all of that potential food is lost for good. So an unfortunate thing to see. I hate to see it. And hopefully we'll see the less of it as the Ukrainians push the Russians back out of their lands, and hopefully don't catch the wheat fields on fire, due to actions on either side. With that in mind, we haven't seen a lot of offensive actions once again in the Zaporizhia area. It seems like it's a quiet area of the front, and I believe it'll remain so until the very end of this war. With that, we're now going to be moving up towards Dnipro, and like we saw in Kharkiv today with the law and order being established by the Ukrainian army, we can also see law and order being established by the Ukrainian citizenry, and it's beautiful to see that the Ukrainian citizens also take it upon themselves to issue out some quick justice if the cops aren't around to do it. These two men apparently were trying to break into a car of someone who was from the area of Izium, and in the process they were found, caught by the Ukrainian locals, and they decided to do the traditional taping them to a pole tactic, which I guess you could say is very similar to... What's that thing called, Matthew? I think you might know the name. It's that old thing that was used in the 1700s where you would lean over and your head and your arms would be locked into a stockade, wasn't it? A
stockade. Yeah, that's it.
It's kind of like the Eastern equivalent at this point of the stockade, I guess you could call it. And so we can see them here wrapping them up around the pole in sarin wrap and letting the public know that these people are criminals.
Так. Вроде вызывали, да?
Да.
И что они, блядь, ломанули туда вниз?
Эти два кадра сегодня у нас во дворе.
I don't think it's stockade, I think it's stocks, actually.
Парня-переселенца, который приехал с Изюма. Ну, Игорь запомнил. Вот. И после обеда мы шли в гараж, их увидели. Ну и задержали.
This kind of justice is something that I think is very good to see. It shows that the public actually has a line that can be crossed. And if you cross that line, sometimes they don't wait for cops. Sometimes if the cops aren't around or the cops can't get there, you're not going to get away. They're going to make sure you pay for your crimes, which I think is an important thing that the society imposes its own contracts and rules and makes sure that they're enforced. Because if it wasn't for this, crime could be running rampant everywhere, because if the police are overtaxed and overburdened, then you can get away with whatever you want, but the citizens are going to make sure that they pick up that slack and make sure that this kind of stuff doesn't happen. Very glad to see that from the Ukrainians, of course. It's a beautiful thing to see. I say that about a lot of things that happen inside of the country, but it's good to see that the citizens are, of course, ensuring that the law is upheld and criminals will be punished. Of course, they didn't get any kind of a due process or a court trial or anything, but in wartime, that kind of stuff is suspended for the more tried and true, let's just punish them here right now and get this thing over with. With that, we're now going to be moving out of the Dnipro area, and we're now going to be moving past Kherson. We covered that news earlier, and so if you had joined the stream a little late, just make sure to rewind to the very beginning because we covered that news first thing. Moving on down into Crimea. A new train has crossed over the Kerch Bridge once more, which is a crime that is still standing. I hope it won't be for longer. And we can see that a train has crossed with a brand new supply of relics from the museums. Let's take a look at what they're bringing in from the Kupelinka Tank Museum. That looks a lot like a whole bunch of T-72As. Doesn't it? Don't really see any reactive armor on them. We see some BMP-3s up there, and we see all of these tanks, but not a lot of modern equipment on them. Let's just look at these right here. No reactive plates on the front. No reactive tiles on the turret. Okay, that is a T-72B3 right there. You could see the tiles. And another T-72B3. And then it looks like we got a T-72A down there. And I just gotta give y'all a comparison. This is important. And I think that this is something that has to be told. The T-72B3 is a T-72A that's been heavily upgraded. I'll kind of give y'all the lifespan of what a T-72 has looked like through time. When the T-72s were first introduced into service, this is what they looked like, and they were called T-72As. These things were introduced into Soviet service around the early 70s, I believe. The very early 70s. After a while, this tank started to become outdated, and the armor was not up to spec anymore. And so what did they do? Well, they decided to upgrade the T-72As by putting explosive reactive armor on them, and then they called these tanks the T-72Bs. So here's what a T-72B looks like, in lack of a better picture. This is from a video game, but that's what it looks like. And under these tiles, it is still a T-72A from the early 70s. But after a while, this tank also became outdated as well, and it didn't really stand up against Western firepower like it once did. And so they had to think up something else to try and upgrade this thing and bring it up to spec. And they came up with two different alternative options to do that. One, they came up with the T-90A. Now, while it does have an entirely different number set, instead of it being a T-72, it's called the T-90A. A T-90A is an upgraded version of the T-72. Now, it's always going to go back to the T-72, but notice, the wheels, there are 6 large road wheels, and on this tank, there are 6 large road wheels. The hull of this tank is the exact same as a T-72A. The only thing different with the T-90 is the turret, and it gets these IR spotlights, which you can see on the front of it, and also some more modern firing systems, computer systems inside the turret, pretty much. The other alternative that they came up with to the T-72B was to tack on even more armor to the original T-72A, and then they created the T-72B3. There were, of course, a couple in between, but they're really minor variants that weren't produced in large numbers. But this, while looking really modern, and it has a lot of little bells and whistles on it in terms of the armor package it has here, if you took all of that off, it is still a T-72A like this one right here. And that's very important to note, is that there isn't really a lot of difference in between a T-72B3 and a T-72A rather than that armor package that they tacked onto the original tank. So they're not different tanks whatsoever. This is literally just an upgraded version of the original T-72A. To kind of draw that into comparison, that's like taking a 1984 Honda Civic and putting a new engine into it, or giving it a new paint job. That's pretty much what this is, in the best terms I can describe it. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit more about the different versions of the T-72, because I know I throw out the numbers a lot, and everyone's like, well, what's the difference? That's really the difference. And so with that, we're now going to be moving out of Crimea, and we've now covered all of the Southern Front news for the night, but we have one bit of international news, and y'all are going to flip. Now, I'm going to give this just a second. Call up your friends, call up your family, call up everyone around the world. I know this wasn't the title or the thumbnail for tonight, but we finally heard the news. It's happening, and it's actually in the works as of right now, as of we speak. So I'm going to give this just a moment so that way everyone who wants to hop on here and everyone who wants to tell other people to hop on here can, because this news is huge. All right, now that we've given just a little bit of time, I know that was like 10 seconds, which isn't a lot. Now that we've given enough time, hold on to your seats. Make sure that you're sitting down because you're about to pass out if you're not sitting down. Ukraine's finally getting jets. They're getting MiG-29s. They're getting all of Slovakia's MiG-29s, all 12 of them. The Slovaks have made an agreement with the United States to buy the brand new F-16 Block 70s as a replacement to their aging MiG-29 fleet, and they're not only going to be sending over 12 brand new MiG-29s, they're going to be sending over even more. They're going to be sending over the spare parts for these MiG-29s. They're going to be sending over the whole 9 yards. Everything that can be included to keep these things flying. Not only that, but Bulgaria is throwing their Su-25s into the picture as well. We don't really know a lot about this at the moment, but apparently it's a supposed 14 additional Su-25s that'll be handed over to the Ukrainian army. Hopefully they can get rid of this puke-colored camouflage because it's honestly about the ugliest camouflage I've ever seen on a single plane. But it's wonderful to hear that the Ukrainians are finally getting planes. It's been months. And someone has finally grown the balls, Slovakia of all countries, which is incredibly small, and they're going to be sending over their MiG-29s. They've also come up with a special agreement with the Czech Republic because that's literally their entire fighter aircraft force they're sending to Ukraine. The Czech Republic has a special agreement now that they will be protecting Slovakia's airspace as well until those F-16s from the United States arrive. If we scroll a little bit further down the article, of course, they show that picture of the burned out Su-34 from earlier in the war. But the Ukrainians are getting a total, at least on paper, of around 25 brand new aircraft for the Air Force. It is wonderful, and I cannot believe it's actually happening. Hopefully this will help the Ukrainians turn the tide of the war, and I think that the Su-25s will be about more important, honestly, than the MiG-29s. The MiG-29s will help with air superiority, but the Ukrainians already own the skies, and so I think it's going to be more beneficial for the Ukrainians to get those Su-25s, because that's going to help them out with ground support missions, which of course will help them in pushing offensives here in the future. Wonderful, incredible news to hear, and I saw that actually a lot of people hopped on to hear that, and I hope y'all were pretty happy, and I hope that this pleased y'all, and I bet Ukrainians are bouncing out of their shoes and out of their skin right now in excitement to know that they're finally getting more planes for their Air Force that has been embattled, beaten, and bloodied, but they're still in the fight, they're still hanging on, and now they're going to get a brand new lease of life with all of these old Soviet planes that they are very well trained on. With that, we're now going to return back to Ukraine and to Kyiv, where we're going to hear the speech from President Zelenskyy, which is going to round out our news segment for tonight, and it's also going to round out our news for the week. Of course, we'll be moving into the question segment right after this, so it's not the end of the stream, but here's the speech from President Zelenskyy on day 137 of the war. And so, without further ado, here is the speech.
Українці, всі наші захисники і захисниці сьогодні увесь день отримують звіти з міста Часів Яр на Донеччині. Там продовжується рятувальна операція після російського удару по житлових будинках. Зруйновані 2 багатоповерхівки. Під завалами десятки людей, 6 вдалося врятувати. У списку загиблих 15 прізвищ і, на жаль, це не остаточне число. Це був ракетний удар. І кожен, хто віддає накази на такі удари, кожен, хто їх здійснює по звичайним нашим містам, по житловим районам, вбиває абсолютно усвідомлено. Після таких ударів вбивці не зможуть сказати, що чогось не знали або щось не розуміли. Усі, хто здійснив цей обстріл, інші ракетні удари, усі, хто б'є по наших містах з реактивної артилерії, як на Харківщині, на Запоріжжі, як по Кривому Рогу, як по Сіверську і Вугледару, на Донеччині, усі вони будуть знайдені. Знаєте, нацистських вбивць знаходять і судять навіть тоді, коли їм вже виповнилось по 90 чи 100 років. Їх ловлять по всьому світу. Звісно, ми не хочемо чекати так довго, але я наводжу цей приклад, щоб показати, що покарання невідворотне для кожного російського вбивці, для кожного абсолютно. Так само, як і для нацистів. І хай вони не сподіваються, що їхня держава буде їх захищати. Росія першою ж їх кине, коли зміняться політичні обставини. Від початку цього вторгнення українські правоохоронці роблять все, що необхідно для фіксації злочинів окупантів і для збору доказів. До цієї роботи залучені наші партнери з багатьох держав. Російський терор давно перетнув ту межу, за якою багатьом в цивілізованому світі стало очевидно, що це питання глобальної безпеки. Покарати Росію, державу-терориста, за все зроблено нею проти України і міжнародного правопорядку. І моєму графіку на найближчі тижні саме такі переговори і звернення, які сприятимуть відновленню справедливості, сприятимуть покаранню російських воєнних злочинців. Причому ця активність направлена не тільки на Європу та інші традиційні регіони для роботи української дипломатії. Зробимо все, щоб і в Латинській Америці, і в Азії, і в Африці чули правду про російський терор на нашій землі. На тижні, що минає, багато говорили про нібито оперативну паузу в діях окупантів на Донбасі та в інших частинах України. 34 нальоти російської авіації за одну минулу добу – це відповідь усім тим, хто придумав цю паузу. Українська армія тримається міцно, відбиває штурми на різних напрямках, але, звичайно, потрібно зробити ще дуже багато, щоб російські втрати стали такими, після яких дійсно буде пауза. Причому пауза не перед новими наступами окупантів, а перед їх втечею з нашої української рідної землі. Я вдячний усім нашим бійцям, які забезпечують наближення цього часу. Це так само невідворотне, як і покарання для окупантів, але треба триматись, треба битись разом на всіх фронтах зараз. І на політичному, і на інформаційному, і на економічному, ніде не проявляючи слабкості. В цій війні ми можемо вистояти тільки спільно, абсолютно всі, кожен українець, кожна українка. Слава усім, хто захищає нашу рідну державу. Слава Україні!
With that is the end of the speech from President Zelensky, and that rounds out the Day 137 news. And as of right now, the flags of Ukraine still fly over most of the country, and we have survived a whole other 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. The nation still stands, and they're doing as good now as they have been through the entirety of the war, and hopefully will do even better in the coming weeks as we hear of the preparations for massive offensives. If you were here for the news alone tonight, I thank you all so much for watching. We're, of course, about to go over our fundraiser number again here in a second, but I'm actually going to have to take the fire out of Matthew's chance to say that here, just in case if y'all are leaving. We managed to raise $7,000 tonight. $7,000. Let's do some math before everyone leaves. Well, not everyone, but about 500 or 600 of y'all usually leave. And let's see what our total for the fundraiser has gotten to at this point. Before this fundraiser tonight, we had raised $343,987.47 because the cents count. We're now going to add exactly $7,000 to that. It's a little over, but sadly I can't see that here on my screen. We have raised $350,987.47 in support for Ukraine. We have made the number round, and we've made the number very nice. It's honestly impressive to me that we were able to raise $350,000 on all of these fundraisers. It's unbelievable, really. It's been 18 weeks of fundraisers since the very start of this war, and we've had big ones, we've had little ones. In fact, the largest one we ever had, we raised $52,000 for, I believe, Doctors Without Borders, if I'm correct. But it's just it's unbelievable, really. It's amazing to think that we've made it to $350,000 raised in support. I remember when it was a big thing when we made it to $250,000. That was big. And we've now gone $100,000 beyond that. And that's even crazier. I mean, like, at this point, it's almost hard to process. And we've done this in only 4 months' time. That's I think that comes out to about $70-something thousand per month in this war that this channel's managed to raise for nonprofits operating in Ukraine. And I've got to say, it's unbelievable. I don't even know where to go with this. I'm at a loss for words. all I can do is just look at the figure, and I got to say thank you all once again. And I'm going to try and do something very special for all of y'all if I can here in the future. We're going to, of course, try and make these Sunday fundraisers a little bit more interesting. Probably try and bring on guest stars again, like Starsky. And also, there's a lot of people asking for Denis Davidoff to be on here. And we'll probably try and reach out and have guest stars back on here again. So that way there's, of course, something a little bit extra and a little bit new to add to the Sunday fundraisers once more. And also get words and stories from people who actually are from Ukraine or are in Ukraine right now. And so with that, thank you all so much for watching once again. And we're now going to move into our question segment and also recognize some of our largest supporters in between the last question segment and this one. And after we do that, we're then going to answer as many questions as we can before the night ends. And so with that, take it away, Matthew.
All right. So I do want to recognize a $50 donation from Dad Good. So thank you very much for that. And also, we had several very large donations come in from our anonymous donor. I'm not sure who that is. They didn't want to be recognized on the stream, apparently, but you know who you are, and you're probably still watching. So big thank you from the Leaf Spring Army, and thank you for putting us over that $7,000 figure. We are now 3,000 over our goal and absolutely smashing our goals here recently. So thank you to everyone for that. I'm going to say it one more time. Thank you for all the smaller donations as well. I know we just recognized our top ones live on the stream, but all of them add up. So with that being said, Enforcer, we do have a lot of really good questions that I've been compiling throughout the stream, and I am ready with those when you are.
You know what? We're not going to answer them. I'm just kidding. On to the first one.
All right. And up first, we have a question from Amor Fatih, who says, Enforcer, what happens if Russia is out of ammo? Do they then use nuclear?
Oh, no. Usually that's something that a military looks at a lot. Supplies are always on the minds of everyone in military circles. So if they're starting to run low on ammo, you'll see them start to pull back a lot of their offensive actions, and they'll start to pretty much operate defensives only, because that consumes a lot less in terms of materials and supplies. So you wouldn't believe this, but in World War I, both sides ran out of ammunition at about the same time. And that was around the end of 1914, and that's when you started to see that all of the crazy, ungodly levels of activity that occurred within the first months of 1914 died down, and the front line started to stabilize and stay that way through the rest of the war, because both sides really didn't have an ability to continue fighting. They had run out of ammunition almost entirely. And that's something that the Russians may be doing right now. In fact, they may be so low on supplies, that's why they're not pushing any offensives anywhere anymore. But then again, that's just pure speculation on our end. They may just be trying to recuperate the units, because there's a load of things going on behind the scenes for the Russians that's not really to their advantage in any way, shape, or form. So I hope that does answer the question, at least in a way. If they ran out of ammunition and they had no chance of recouping it, and the Ukrainians were pushing them back out, they would most likely try and start brokering a peace agreement at that point. Nuclear weapons, I feel like, are going to be not used at all. I feel like they're entirely threats, and to actually use them would be insane. But then again, the Russians are crazy, and that always throws a wrench into that assumption they may actually use them. But that's kind of where I'm at right now. So I hope that does answer the question, at least in my opinion. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right. And I want to give a shout out to KG for putting in a $50 donation. Thank you very much. We are now at 7.2 thousand on the fundraiser, so absolutely tremendous. And up next, we have a question from Herp Derp NV, who says, what is your opinion on the new German KF-51 tank design that was recently announced?
I have seen it. There's not really a lot known about it right now, so really all we can talk about is the cosmetic value of the tank. It looks like Wikipedia tried to make an article. You can see how little information is known about the K-51 just by how bare the Wikipedia article is about it. It's also brand new. So let's go to some pictures. Let's look at it real quick. So my initial thoughts on this tank is that it looks like a streamlined Leopard 2. That's just my opinion. And, you know, I mean, like, there's not really a lot known about this. We do know it has a 130mm gun, which is bigger than the 120mm gun that's currently on the Leopard 2 A6s and 7s. but I'm going to be honest with you, I'm not really seeing too much that's different about it. In fact, the wheelbase looks identical to a Leopard 2. Let's pull that up. Leopard 2 A6. Images. Let's go to the Leopard. Can we get a side view of the Leopard? Is that impossible to get? Here we go. Alright, so there's one. Let's look. You got 7 wheels, certain kind. They have 7 wheels down here. What about that sprocket? Let's take a real close look at the sprocket, see if they're identical. Because it looks honestly like it's just a really streamlined Leopard 2, and there's not really a lot extra to it. So there's the sprocket there. There's the sprocket on that K51. And they're identical. And so the wheelbase on this thing is exactly identical to a Leopard 2A6. So it may be using the exact same hull. And the turret looks about the same as well. It has that kind of angled inwards turret armor. I don't really know exactly what it's called. Sorry about that. I'm not really into the terms of what things are called much. But if you look at the turret of a Leopard 2A6, you can kind of just see that they took the hard corners and angles on the Leopard 2A6 and they just kind of streamlined them a little bit. Honestly, in my opinion, it just looks like a more polished, prettier looking Leopard 2. I don't really see a lot about this that's special, honestly. One thing that is cool, though, is the headlights, but why in the world does a tank need headlights that are embedded in the track flaps? That's like doing something for a car. It's like, why would a tank need stylized headlights? I don't know why. I mean, like on the Leopard 2, if you look at the Leopard 2, let me find a good picture of it. Hopefully, if you look right here, it just has little headlight lamps that stick out of the hull, and that's all you need. You don't need to go and spend extra amounts of money to stick in stylized headlights. That's what you do for like a car or something. But then again, you know, it does look cool, and if it doesn't cost much, like rather than like an extra $1,000 or $500, I wouldn't really judge it too bad. But in my opinion, it just looks like
they've got to flex. They've got to flex on the enemy now.
Yeah, they got to flex on them. You know, they got to have the stylized headlights. I'm sure they have a GPS navigation system in there and some Bang & Olufsen surround sound or something. I don't know if you're seeing this, Matthew. I'll actually share my screen with you so that way you can see it with me live. But I'm going to show you these two tanks. This is the KF-51 from the front.
That looks pretty cool, I'll admit.
It
That's
looks
pretty neat.
It looks really cool, but it looks a lot like a refined and streamlined Leopard 2A6 to the point they're using the exact same chassis.
True. I actually take it back. I kind of like the older one better.
Honestly, I kind of do too. It looks more like a tank. This looks like a designer tank. It looks like something you would get in the Supreme or the Gucci store. You know, I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
it's not really my tank, in my opinion. I mean, like, it's the future probably, but I'm not really having it. I think honestly the British are doing it a lot better with the Black Knight tank, which is an upgrade of the Challenger, and they make no pretenses. It is literally just a Challenger, but they're doing a lot to try and upgrade Challengers and keep them relevant. Although now we hear that they may be retiring all their tanks, and this may have been a pointless endeavor. But I hope that kind of answers the question, and let us know in the... Wait a minute, did you already put up a poll for that? Oh, yeah,
sure
you did. Yeah. I was about to say, throw up a poll, but you already did. And a lot of people really do like the KF-51. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. It looks like a lot of people really like it. And with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and before I move on to the next question, I want to recognize a couple of more donations that just came in. We have a $100 donation from MMC and a $50 donation from WL. So thank you very much for keeping those donations rolling in and making progress on that fundraiser. I can't see it, so let me check my control panel real quick. We are at 7.3 thousand on the fundraiser. So it's crazy. We're still making progress, and we have very clearly smashed our goal. So thank you to everybody for your generosity. And we are moving on. Well, actually, David, since you said it, yeehaw! And we're moving on to our next question, which is from Khan Azor, who says, do you think that if Belarus does join the fight and accidentally crosses into Poland, that Poland and the rest of the world would get into war?
Could you reread that one again for me real quick?
Yes. Khan Azor says, do you think that if Belarus does join the fight and accidentally cross into Poland, that Poland and the rest of the world would get into war?
That's a very complex diplomatic situation because the straightforward answer would be yes. But the diplomatic answer would be no, most likely. If the Belarusians did that, the Russian overlords would go, "You did what?" And they would immediately step out and say, "Hey, Belarus is idiots." You know what I mean? And they don't really know what they're doing. So please apologize, Belarus. And then Lukashenko goes, "Sorry." And then the Russians would say, "Please forgive us for this transgression. We didn't really mean it. We don't want to go to war with y'all. We actually respect y'all heavily. Just don't do anything." And we would most likely say, "Okay, we're not going to do anything." And that's how it would most likely turn out, because the Belarusians and the Russians are both part of the same military alliance called the CSTO. It's like the Russian version of NATO. And if the Belarusians did cross over into Poland, the implications of doing that and then not backing down are too great. And so the Russians would immediately issue an apology, because it would most likely be an accidental transgression. And then the United States would tell the Polish, "You're just going to have to let that slide, so that way we don't start the Third World War." Because one thing that always has to be understood is that the implications of being surefire on the charter, on the NATO charter in Article 5, could lead hundreds of millions of people to get killed in a massive world war, and then hundreds of millions more in a nuclear onslaught. And so that always has to be weighed into consideration, and usually people are very forgiving when putting the fate of the entire world in the palm of your hand over a small border incursion. So with that, I hope that kind of does answer the question, because usually those kinds of things are resolved fairly peacefully, actually, and they don't directly lead into war. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from MD Prime, who says, "Enforcer, how much do you think Ukrainian is watching the waterways? They perform their counterattacks near the coast in the south, question mark. I love your content, and I've been watching since around day 76.
Now, thank you so much for the question. In day 76, wow, you've been here for nearly 70 days. But man, you know what's crazy at this point is that 70 days is nothing to scoff at. That's like 2.5 months. But what's weird is that we have a lot of viewers here that have been here since day 4. And it's bizarre to me to think about that, because they've been here for 4.5 months now. And it's a true statement of dedication to the Lee Spring Army, and all of our members. But still, to try and talk about the South a little bit, the Ukrainians are counterattacking here because this appears to be the Russians' weakest link in their front lines, and also Kherson is strategically important. And if they can regain control of Kherson and the river banks on the other side, pretty much across the entire length of the Dnieper River, they may begin to resume river traffic up and down the Dnieper River. But then again, that's still very questionable. So with that, I hope that does answer the question, at least briefly. But with that, we're moving on to the next question.
And moving on, we have a question from Happy Dragon, who says, "Enforcer and Matthew, you may have covered this before, but Putin, because desperate for recruits, has issued a stealth mobilization. It's funny terminology, don't you think?"
Could you reread that one more time?
They said, "Enforcer and Matt, you may have covered this before, but Putin, because he's desperate for recruits, has issued a stealth mobilization. It's funny terminology, don't you think?"
I would say so, considering that we all know about it, but I actually haven't heard about that. So I guess that's kind of a little bit of a paradox there. Everyone's heard about it except for me. I think I've heard something in that category, but then again, I haven't heard that exactly. So if it did happen, and that's what they're calling it, that's really stupid, because everyone knows about it, including us. So with that, I hope that kind of does weigh in on it, because if they actually called it a ghost mobilization or whatnot, and then we all know about it, that's not really ghostly or quiet or secret or anything. That's pretty public. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I hope that does address the comment.
All right, and moving on, we have a question from Fern Joseph, who says, "Please ask the Enforcer if he thinks full body armor for infantry is a good idea."
There are trade-offs to everything, and full body armor, while giving a decent amount of advantages, also gives a large amount of trade-offs. It's really heavy to wear full body armor, and it's also very cumbersome. You can't really move your arms as much in full body armor as you would without. And when I say full body armor, I'm talking about the whole 9 yards. I'm talking about the arm ballistic coverings. I'm talking about the groin. You know, like I'm talking about the heaviest full protection vest you could imagine. Let me see if I can pull up a picture. Full protection, bulletproof vest. Full coverage, I guess we'll call it that. Here you go. You look like a samurai if you dress up in this stuff here. Like this one, the $1,200 level 3A plates. And if I'm correct, Matthew, level 3A plates can stand up to actual assault rifle rounds in velocity. I think the larger one's like 7.62.
I think it might be 3A plus, or I don't really have it down for certain. You're looking at the steel plating?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's the steel plates.
Yeah. And everybody knows, I'm sure people are going to say it in the chat, that the spalling is an issue with that. And there are some people that have come out with coatings for steel plates, but, you know, it's kind of up for debate still.
Honestly, I don't really think the spalling is too much of an issue. You know, that's just my opinion. I know that everyone's always like, oh, the spalling. But the thing is that if you're getting shot, I think having some spalling maybe go into your cheek or something is a lot better than having the bullet pass through your chest. You know, that's just me, because if that's the only thing that we have right now that can stop an assault rifle or a heavy caliber round, I would completely negate the argument that I'm a spalling, because I would rather live and have some spalling injuries than actually get shot. But you know, that's just me. Maybe some people would rather get shot or something, but I gotta say, if you're watching my screen, Matthew, this is some beefy looking armor. They got the throat guard. You know, they've got like the arm guards, they've got the groin, they also got the legs.
Like a samurai suit.
Yeah, let's pull up a samurai suit, because that looks a lot like it. Samurai suit. Yeah, here we go. I know it's called samurai armor. It's got a traditional Japanese name. Yeah, I mean, like, well, what is that?
That looks like, very similar.
That's not...
Is that Darth Vader?
That is not samurai armor up here in the top left. We're going to scroll down a little bit. But that looks a lot like Darth Vader, doesn't it? It's got like the Darth Vader mask. It's got like the box on him. Dude, that guy's LARPing Darth Vader in a samurai armor. What in the world?
It's the Chinese version of Darth Vader.
You mean Japanese?
Or yeah, Japanese, my bad.
Oh man. Let's go down further. Let's get away. What the hell is that? Dude, I don't know if LARPer... I guess LARPers look at samurai armor a lot. I've never really have. But what is up with this weird stuff? Like, so... I don't... we're moving on. We're going to try and find someone actually wearing the armor. If we can. It looks like it's going to be kind of hard to find. We'll just go to this one. Alright, so let's take a look at this. Arm guards, leg guards. Well, it's kind of more like a large... like a kilt, nearly, if I could describe that the best I can. But, I mean, like, that looks a lot like samurai armor and how its layout is. And I guess you could say that's... a testament to the knowledge that the Japanese had when designing samurai armor, is that, of course, it covered the vital areas. I guess you could also say it kind of looks like some of the larger, I guess you could call them breastplates that European armor had. European, and hopefully when I pull this up, it doesn't pull up something bad, I pray. It's like playing Russian roulette here. Okay, well, it pulled up some bad stuff up top, but when you look at some of these breastplates like this one, you can also see kind of like the same arm protection, kind of like groin and leg protection there, that is on this body armor. And it's really interesting because we've come so far in a lot of people's heads. A lot of people think that medieval armor and warfare is pretty different than modern warfare, and it is, but in terms of body protection, of course, the armor really retains the same shape and form and purpose. So with that, I hope that kind of addresses the question. Well, not really the question. That didn't really address anything. That was a whole aside on body armor. This body armor is heavy. If we look at the weight, if we can find that here, the tech specs. Why in the world is this stuff called specs? What tech? You know, why not just call it the specs? Anyways, capabilities, multi-hit, minimum 6 shots. Okay. Where in the world is the weight on this thing? Dimensions, maybe. No weight? You're not going to give us a weight?
There's a weight tab right up there.
Oh yeah, I'm blind. Type 3A. The total is going 12 pounds?
That's light.
That's light, actually. There's no way that that's 12 pounds, because I've heard that this stuff can weigh like 40 pounds. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it does weigh 12 pounds. That's what they're saying here. So, but maybe that's just one plate. Maybe that's like the chest plate or something. I don't know. But if it's only weighs 12 pounds, then I would go all for it. 12 pounds isn't that much extra weight to have for body armor, for full body protection, pretty much. And it protects, of course, the throat. I don't know if that's a hard plate. That may be a soft armor. But it protects the arms, the groins, the legs. I mean, like, if it only weighs 12 pounds, that's pretty lightweight. You're covering a lot more of the body in terms of protection. And so I'd say, yeah, based off of that weight we got from this website. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. And I thank you so much for an actually pretty interesting question. We had a really deep aside with that, and also saw some non-armor stuff, some really weird stuff. And so with that, we're on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Santiago Flores, who says, Enforcer, with announcing this upcoming offensive, could it be a psychological game of chess with Putin and maybe trying to provoke Belarusia?
I don't think it would be. I don't think the Ukrainians' attempt is to incite Belarusia, because no one's really going to come to their aid if they stick a stick in a hornet's nest and Belarus attacks them as well. And so that wouldn't really be to their advantage. That would be to their disadvantage. I think what they're doing here is they are just advertising this in advance, so that way the civilians can leave the city of Kherson, which is in accordance with the Geneva Conventions. You're supposed to let, which kind of sounds weird, you're supposed to give everyone a little bit of a heads up notice that you're heading towards the city, so that way there's enough time for them to leave, according to the Geneva Conventions, which is kind of a little very formal, to the point it's like, well, it kind of takes away the whole surprise of an offensive. But anyways, I hope that does answer the question, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from William Harris, who says, Enforcer, did you know that Russia has bombed 352 hospitals thus far in the war?
I did not know that that was the specific number, but I wouldn't doubt it. We've seen a lot of them being bombed out all over the country. And so, while I didn't know that exact number, I would largely accept that as true. And so with that, I hope that does answer the question. And we are on to the next one.
And moving on, we have a question from Archangel, who says, Enforcer, did you hear about the two groups of Russians attacking each other? They say there's many wounded.
I did not. I don't know where that even happened. So sadly, I'm going to have to declare ignorance on my part. I haven't heard about that story to even talk about it. So with that, I hate I can't really answer that question all too well, but if it did happen, I'm cheering on the Russians. So with that, we are on to the next question.
All right, and up next, we have a question from D.L. Hemingway, who says, Enforcer, is the female Ukrainian who does propaganda for the Russians the modern Axis Sally?
Maybe. I don't know which one you're talking about, because I haven't really seen a Ukrainian on the Russian channels, but maybe so. There's always defectors and traitors. In fact, in World War II, there were a couple of American traitors that defected to the Nazi German side once they were captured, and the Germans had pretty grand ambitions to create a George Washington Legion, which, what assholes to use George Washington as the name for their little SS division that they were going to make out of the American Volunteers. But they only got about 3 Americans to join them in their cause, and so it wasn't big enough to create a legion, and so they just ended up being on the radio often in Germany. And then after that, they started to run around the country when things went awry and try and hide from the Americans, and they were eventually found and executed. So I hope that kind of adds in a little bit of context there, that there's usually traitors, and if that is a true story that I haven't heard about, I would say that that's pretty similar in its overall story. I guess that's the best way to say it. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. I also saw someone say Lord Haw Haw, which is very true. That's a really cool story to pull up, and that one's on Mark Felton's channel, which is a really, really good channel. So with that, I hope that does address the question, and with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Jay Bagwell, who says, Enforcer, here is my question. News reported today that Russia is starting to use S-300 AA missiles to fire at ground targets. Not sure if that's feasible, but sounds like something they would try.
It may be feasible. Of course, there's a way you can wire missiles to be surface to surface. I don't know how they would do that. I don't really think the S-300s have a large amount of explosive filler in them to be able to do something like that. and be effective, but of course the Russians could be doing that. They've been doing a lot of ghetto things over the course of the war, like the ghetto bombs and all that stuff. So I wouldn't doubt it, but I haven't gotten any video evidence to back that up here. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I hope that answers that one, at least with the knowledge that we currently have here on the channel. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Khan Azor, who says, the U.S. should stop letting companies from other countries buy all the farmland that's being sold and put in neighborhoods. We need more farms.
Could you reread that one again so that way I could try and get what it's saying?
They said the U.S. should stop letting companies from other countries buy all the farmland that's being sold and putting in neighborhoods. We need more farms.
Well, I thank you very much for the comment, but one thing is that's a bit of a tough one, because you see, it's hard for companies to buy up all the farmland and build homes. And also on top of that, another thing is that if the United States actually stepped in and told people who they could sell land to and not, that would kind of be taking away the whole quasi-free market thing we have going on here. I feel like that, in my opinion, not trying to get political, but I feel like that would be overstepping the government's bounds to step into a farmer selling his land and say, you can't sell it to that guy, you're going to have to sell it to someone else. And, and sadly, if that kind of stuff is happening, it just happens. And if there ever is a need for farmland, of course, the government would step in then and start to do something. But at the same time, one does have to remember the U.S. produces so much food, the government has to pay farmers to destroy it. And so we're not necessarily in a shortage of farmland. It's, in fact, a surplus right now as far as food production versus demand is going. And so with that, I hope that kind of addresses the comment. And with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from R. Garvin, who says, Enforcer, what are the odds do you personally think of the Ukrainians hitting the Kerch Bridge and severing the lifeline to Crimea and to the southern front?
If the Ukrainians were able to knock that out, that's a highly asked question, so I'm going to make this one a little bit short, because I'm sure we'll probably have a second question like this by the end of the night. But if the Ukrainians hit the Kerch Bridge, that's going to be knocking out all the supplies to Crimea, as well as the farthest side of the Western Front, putting massive strains on the Russian supply lines further east, and resulting in most likely a collapse of the Kherson area, and maybe a large gap that the Ukrainians can exploit to then try and reach the Crimean Peninsula near the, I guess you could call it the Strait of Crimea, that kind of exists from Armansk to Chonhar. So I hope that kind of answers the question. I would highly support that kind of attack, because of course it will lead the Russians into a very bad position, and it will cut them off completely from supplying any forces in the Crimean area without that having to travel overseas, which could become incredibly complicated and too difficult for the Russians to pull off, since they don't have the, I guess you could say, the training or the expertise to pull off stuff like that efficiently. And so, now with that mouthful out of the way, I hope that kind of answered the question about the bridge, and with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Havlin Tuff, who says, how long do you think it'll take to start up fertilizer production in the U.S.? We certainly have the natural gas to spare.
Great question. How much fertilizer does each country make per year? The United States produces 13,617,000 metric tons. Now, that was a really weird little data bit there, but how much do we use? How much fertilizer does the U.S. use? Well, that's not really a good equivalent. I don't know how many hectares there are in the U.S. How much fertilizer... Let's see, rebounded to 20.8 million tons, and we produce, let's see here. Can we get a number that just tells us in millions of tons how much we produce, so that way I'm not having to try and do math and rake my brain, which I'm already doing enough. Let's see. Nitrogen fertilizer use per hectare. So we use 72.61. That's actually somewhat high, but the Europeans use it a lot more than... Golly! The Dutch use 242.84 kilograms for a hectare? I don't know what a hectare is in size, How big is a hectare, Matthew, if you know?
I have no idea.
I don't know how big a hectare is in size, but considering we use 72 and they're using 240, that is a lot of fertilizer. The Russians only use 12.2. The Chinese use 219. Golly, some people are out there just dumping the fertilizer out. The Egyptians use 367. Golly. But anyways, how much do we produce? That's the real question. So, come on now.
Somebody said a hectare is bigger than an acre.
Well, yeah, I would assume that, but I don't know by how much. Global consumption. How much fertilizer does the U.S. produce? Let's just get that number. Does the U.S. produce? Duh, we do. It's third largest producer of fertilizer globally. However, it still requires the importation of all three nutrients, especially nitrogen and potash, to fully meet demand. So apparently, we produce a large amount of fertilizer, but it's still not enough to compensate for all the fertilizer we use, and so we have to import some from around the world, but we don't know how much. Let's just type that in. How much fertilizer does the U.S. import? $5.3 billion in fertilizers. Third largest importer of fertilizers in the world. We're the third largest producer and the third largest importer. The U.S. imported about 93% of the potash needs. Canada provides 83% of the potash used in the U.S. Russia and Belarus provide 12%. So they pretty much provide the rest of it, except for about 6 or 7% used in the U.S. in 2021. And so we largely rely on potash, but we get a lot of that from Canada, and there's a very small portion of it that comes from Russia and Belarus. So it's not that big of a deal, and considering that it seems like we have a deficiency in potash either to create or, you know, that we're able to manufacture, it seems like it being an importing issue where we'd have to try and find new importers to of course sell us potash. So I hope that kind of
it's actually Enforcer's actually potash.
Potash. That looks like on this screen, Matty. Doesn't it look like potash to you? It's one word.
Let me see. Oh dang! I just took away the. Oh man, I can't see it, but I'll take your word for it.
All right, so everyone's saying potash, so I'm sorry about that. Y'all just heard me call potash potash. But let's, you know what? We're going to look at this. Potash is the name used for various mined and manufactured salts that contain potassium in water-soluble form. So, it's just salt. Wait a minute, hang on. Let's find out more about this. Interesting. So, pretty much we get most of our fertilizers from Canada. Sorry for calling it potash forever. It's actually potash. But with that, I hope that kind of does answer the question. It seems like it'd be more of an importing issue more than trying to start up our own production, because apparently we're deficient in potash minerals. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question. And I'm sorry once again to everyone who was getting kind of a little triggered in the chat by me saying potash over and over. So with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Ned J10, who says, my question is the stream tracking activity of the neutral countries still trading with Russia and financially benefiting off the war as a result?
That was a bit of a mouthful, and I'm sorry to make you repeat that again, but could you do it for me real quick?
Oh, yes. Real quick, let me see if I can get back to it. There we go. This one was from Ned J10, who said, is the stream tracking activity of the neutral countries still trading with Russia and financially benefiting off the war as a result?
If you're talking about the neutral countries, as in India, Pakistan, and China, yes, they are trading with the Russians, and they are financially gaining off of it. but that's what neutral countries do. And you know, of course, it's always like a thing you would want to wag your finger at them for and say, hey, that's wrong. But you can't really do that too much because the Swiss were a neutral country and they would conduct trade with anyone around them, and that included Nazi Germany and fascist Italy in World War II. And so I can't really act like they're too much at fault. They are, of course, profiting from it, but that's what happens when you're a neutral country. Just to put it into perspective, the United States is not a saint in that regard either. In World War I and World War II, before both of those wars started, we profited off of being a neutral country from both sides. We would do business with the Imperial Germans and the Nazi Germans, and we would also do business with the Allies and also the Entente in World War I, which consisted of the French, the British, and everyone else who was part of those alliances throughout history. So with that, I hope that kind of answers the question, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a question from Bob Perrin, who says, is it true that Ukraine produces 50% of the world's neon? Is this a problem for the semiconductor industry?
How much neon does Ukraine produce? By some accounts, Ukraine was supplying about 70% of the world's neon. Other estimates closer to 50%. Huh. That's nuts. That's crazy. They produce like most of the neon in the world. So not only do they do sunflower seed oil, they also do neon. I don't really. What was the neon in relation to?
In relation to the semiconductor industry.
Sadly, I don't know a lot about how neon kind of interacts with the semiconductor industry. So sadly, I'm going to be ignorant in that regard, and I won't be able to answer that question competently, really, because I don't know a lot about how neon works with semiconductors. Now, I know that a lot of people think that I know everything, but sadly, I don't. So I'm going to have to declare ignorance on that one. I think there would be people out there who are more qualified to answer that question, but sadly, I don't really know a lot about neon and semiconductors. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question, and I'm sorry I couldn't answer that one. But also, speaking of which, we are getting near the end of our time, and so we're going to answer probably around 2 more questions, and then we're going to be rounding out tonight's stream. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
Okay, and with that in mind, I'm trying to scan here and see if I can find the most interesting questions. And it looks like up next we have a question from Level 70, who says, Enforcer, what strategy do you think the Ukrainians will follow to take back Kherson? Will the Russians fight street by street, or just offer another goodwill gesture to Ukraine?
I'm never going to get into exact details about what I think the Ukrainians will do. I just will say that, of course, it'll be a counterattack towards Kherson. I think that if it got difficult for the Russians, there's a lot that could happen to them that's negative. They would probably do another sign of goodwill thing and just kind of retreat from the city if things started to look very disadvantageous to them, instead of trying to fight street for street, because if they did that, the Ukrainians could pretty much encircle a large amount of Russians, if I'm looking at things the right way. So with that, I hope that does answer the question. We are going to answer one final question, and that'll be the end of the stream for the night, and that'll be the end of the streams until Tuesday at 10 p.m. And so with that, what is the last question of the night? And the last question of this news week as well.
All right, so the last comment of the night comes from Happy Dragon, who says, Enforcer and Matt, please remind people that if you meet someone with a Russian accent, that they came to America for a reason, and don't be mean to them. Thank you. And yes, Happy Dragon, that is very wise words right there. I'm sure there are some Russians in America that probably support the war, and there are many that probably don't as well. We made the mistake during World War II of mistreating the Japanese in America when that war broke out, and we definitely don't want to repeat history on that one.
And that's very true. But at the same time, I would like to say this as a counter, just, so that way we can look at both sides. There's never a black and white to everything. And while there's a lot of Russians in the United States who condemn the war in their strongest, there's also Russians that will support it. For example, look at the large Russian population in Germany that openly supports the Russians through and through. Also, look at the large Russian populations in Israel that support the Russians through and through. There are Russians out there who have traveled to other countries, and you would assume, considering that they left Russia because they couldn't make a living there or they were being persecuted, that they would not support them because they know firsthand what Russia's like. But then there's people who, regardless of that, will still support the Russians. And so I would by and large say that the general assumption you should have when meeting a Russian in the United States is that they most likely do not support the war. But then again, don't ever be taken by surprise if they say something like, you know, I think that this whole entire... Wait a minute, no, that's not a Russian accent, that's a German accent. 1 second. I think that this, I can't do it, whatever, I can't do it tonight. But if they say something like, I think the Ukrainians are doing some funny business, don't ever be surprised, because that could be something that they could say. And once again, I would like to say this, I think this would be a better thing to say, don't judge a book by its cover. Just because they speak a Russian accent doesn't mean they're going to think one way or another. Just like when you talk to someone that speaks normal English with an American accent, that doesn't always mean that they're going to be supporting Ukraine. They might be supporting Russia, and there's really no way to know until you talk to them. And so just don't judge a book by its cover. Go on a case-by-case basis, which is the better thing to do. And so with that, I hope that kind of does address the question. And also, I see some people saying don't throw Russians and Israel under the bus. I'm not throwing them under the bus, but at the same time, they have in the past done massive demonstrations in Israel showing their support for the Russians. And so there is a group of Russians down there from Russia that still support what the Russians are doing, although they're in Israel. So that is something that did happen. Not all of them are, of course, supporting Russia, but there was a sizable amount we were seeing on film that did. At least I didn't show that on stream, but I saw it in the background. And so with that, that is the end of tonight's question segment. And also, just to wrap up once more, I would say don't judge a book by its cover. You know, I was trying to answer within the parameters there, but I don't really think one should just assume that all Russians in America will either be for the war or against it. It's a case-by-case thing. Everyone is an individual, and because each person is a separate entity, that means they're going to be thinking different. And so it would be unwise, and it would be somewhat foolish to say that all of them think one way or all of them think of the other. They may be thinking entirely different ways. In fact, they may not even have an opinion. And so with that, that is the end of tonight's stream. And that is the end of all of the streams for this week of news. I thank you all so much once again for watching. We've raised $7.5 thousand in support of Ukraine and Doctors Without Borders. And it's an impressive thing to know that we did it again. We far exceeded the goal that we put out tonight by 50%. Our original goal was $5,000, and we got up to $7.5 thousand in support. I thank you all once again. I hope you all have enjoyed tonight's stream. It's been an absolute pleasure to me to be able to report to y'all the news of what's been going on in Ukraine, and I hope you all have enjoyed it as well, because it has definitely been one exciting night, a very interesting night news-wise, and of course, always fun to try and drum up as much support as possible to help out Ukraine. I thank you all so much for watching. It has been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all on Tuesday at 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and me and Matthew are going to enjoy our break day off tomorrow on our Monday. Thank you all once again for watching, and I'll see you then. Good night, and take care.
Запануєм і ми, браття,